They say legends are born in blood and dust. Maybe that's true. But the legend they tell about Delaney Frost, the one about the widow who became Shadowstep again, that one was born in a broken stable lock and a promise 8 years old. I was there when it happened. 22 years old, deputy marshal under Vernon Blackridge, thinking I knew what justice looked like, thinking right and wrong were as clear as black ink on white paper. The spring of 1886 taught me different. My name is Cole Arnett. I'm the Marshal of Copper Springs now, have been for near about 10 years. Got an office with a desk that doesn't wobble and a window that looks out on the same dusty street I walked as a green deputy who didn't know his ass from a saddle horn. On my wall, right above where I keep the territorial law books, there's a silver badge with turquoise inlay. Real Apache work, the kind you don't see much anymore. A young deputy asked me about it just last week. Fresh from the Territorial Academy, still had polish on his boots. That belonged to Delaney Frost, I told him. His eyes went wide like a kid hearing about ghosts. Shadowstep? Everyone's heard the legend, sir. I leaned back in my chair and looked at that badge the way I do most evenings when the light slants through the window just right. Makes the turquoise catch fire, almost like it's alive. Let me tell you what the legend gets wrong, I said, and this is what I told him. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the painted desert when Delaney Frost noticed something wrong. I wasn't there for that part. Didn't witness the exact moment she found the broken lock hanging loose from her stable door. But I heard about it soon enough, and over the years Delaney filled in the details I missed. So I can tell it true the way it happened. She rose before dawn that day, same as every day. Shadow Crest Ranch sat against the slope of Coyote Ridge, about 5 miles south of Copper Springs proper. 100 acres of hard country, the kind that breaks weak men and tests strong ones. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms weathered gray by wind and sun, but the corral was solid, the fences mended regular, and the horses she raised there were the finest in 3 territories. People noticed that. Even the ones who didn't much care for a woman running a ranch alone noticed the quality of Delaney Frost's horses. At 46, she wore her years like good leather, creased but strong. Streaks of silver threaded through dark hair she kept braided back from a face that didn't give much away. Copper-colored eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. Hands that were gentle with animals and hard with work. Most folks in Copper Springs figured her for a widow making do. They knew her husband died some years back, up north somewhere. They knew she kept to herself, sold horses when she needed money, and didn't attend church socials or quilting circles. What they didn't know could fill a book. That morning, Delaney pulled on worn leather boots and a plain cotton shirt. Practical clothes for practical work. She stepped onto the porch and drew in the cool desert air. Sage and dust and the promise of heat to come. A red-tailed hawk circled high above the eastern ridge. She watched it for a moment the way you watch something beautiful without needing to name why it matters. Then she crossed the packed earth toward the corral where her prize stallion should have been waiting. Ashwind. The silver-dun Mustang was more than just a valuable animal. He was the proof of everything she'd built in 8 quiet years. His bloodline traced back to Spanish horses that escaped into the wild centuries ago. Smart, strong, and trained with patience instead of breaking. Under Delaney's careful hand, he'd become something exceptional. But that morning, the silence struck first. Normally, Ashwind would greet her with a low nicker long before she reached the gate. A sound she'd come to count on, the way you count on sunrise. The sound never came. Delaney's stride slowed. Something tightened in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Instinct, maybe, or memory, hard to say which. The lock lay on the ground, cleanly cut. She stood there looking at it for a long moment. The metal was bright where the cutters had sheared through. Professional work. Someone who knew what they were doing and had the right tools for it. The stable door stood open. Inside, Ashwind's stall was empty, fresh water still in the trough. Hay scattered where he'd been eating before someone came, and boot prints in the dirt floor. Foreign marks, deliberate, unmistakable. Delaney knelt and studied them without touching anything. 4 men, she judged. Maybe 5. One heavy-set, boots worn down on the outside edge, another with a limp favoring his left side. Expensive footwear, the kind that didn't come from Copper Springs General Store, the kind you saw on men who worked for someone with money. Near the water trough, deep scuff marks showed where Ashwind had fought back. Her hand hovered just above the disturbed soil, not quite touching it, but reading it the way some folks read print, seeing the story written there in dust and displaced stone. Her breathing steadied. Her face went very calm, very still. Anyone who'd known her before, really known her, would have recognized that look, the hunter acknowledging prey. She found the button half buried near the gate. Brass, small enough to fit in her palm, etched with a scorpion, the detail work fine and deliberate. Not the kind of thing a man loses by accident, the kind of thing that falls off during a struggle when a horse is fighting and men are working fast. Delaney lifted it into the morning light. The years fell away like cards from a deck. 8 years of quiet. 8 years of building a life where nobody asked questions. 8 years of being nobody except a widow who raised horses. All of it gone in the time it took to recognize that scorpion mark. Marrowvane, she whispered. The name tasted like ashes. She closed her fist around the button and stood. The sun was fully up now, heating the air, burning off the last of the cool. A normal day in every way except this one. Delaney walked back to the cabin with measured steps, not hurrying, not dragging, just moving with the kind of purpose that comes when a decision's been made, even if you haven't admitted it yet. Inside, she went straight to the loose floorboard beneath her bed. The board came up easy. She'd placed it there herself 8 years back when she decided to bury one life and start another. In the hollow space below rested a wooden box inlaid with turquoise, a patchywork made by her grandfather Taryn before he died. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside lay the tools of her former life. A custom Colt revolver, balanced perfect for a woman's hand, etched with fine scrollwork along the barrel, a brass spyglass that could pick out a man at 1,000 yards. A leather-bound journal filled with tracking notes written in her own hand. Maps, patterns, methods for reading sign in every kind of country from mountain to desert. And beneath it all, a silver star. Not a local badge, the kind issued by federal marshals with weight to it, authority that crossed territorial lines and opened doors that local law couldn't touch. Under the star lay a folded wanted notice, yellowed with age. The paper crackled when she unfolded it. A younger version of herself looked back from the sketch, harder around the eyes, hair pulled back severe, no silver streaks yet. Delaney Frost. The text read, though most folks called her by another name back then. Shadowstep. The tracker no fugitive could outrun. The marshal who'd brought in more wanted men than any 2 agents combined. Trained from childhood by her Apache grandfather after her parents died in a border raid, turned into something the territorial government needed and used and honored right up until the day it all went wrong. Samaran Pass. The memory hit like a fist. Rowan falling, the crack of rifles from high rocks, her own scream tearing the air, blood on stone and the burning path of a bullet across her right shoulder. The taste of failure and the weight of a promise made while holding a dying man. Build something that lasts, Rowan had whispered. Stop hunting. Be the woman you were before all this blood. She'd promised, and she'd kept that promise for 8 years, but now Marrowvane had forced her hand. Delaney traced the silver star with one finger. The metal was cold despite the warming day. She picked up the Colt, checked the action, still smooth, still perfect, and set it back down. Not yet. First, she needed to know what she was dealing with. Needed to understand if this was just a rustling operation that happened to hit her ranch, or if Vane knew exactly whose horse he'd taken. Because if he knew, if he'd discovered where Shadowstep had been hiding all these years, then This wasn't about a horse at all. This was personal. A knock at the door pulled her back from the edge of memory. "Mrs. Frost? You home?" Cole Arnett's voice. Young, earnest, probably worried about something he didn't fully understand yet. Delaney slid the silver badge back into the box and tucked the Colt into her waistband, hidden beneath her shirt. She closed the box, replaced the floorboard, and went to answer the door. I stood on her porch with my hat in my hands, concern written all over my face. 22 years old and thinking I understood trouble because I'd broken up a few saloon fights and arrested some drunks for disturbing the peace. I didn't know a damn thing. "Morning, Deputy," Delaney said. Calm as Sunday morning, like nothing was wrong. I shifted my weight, uncomfortable with what I'd come to say. "Morning, ma'am. I was just riding out this way and thought I should tell you. We've had reports of horse thefts, multiple ranches hit during the night." "I know," she said, "and someone took Ashwind." My eyes widened. "Your stallion?" "Mrs. Frost, I'm real sorry. We're organizing a posse, but with the ground this dry and—" "How many ranches?" she interrupted, voice still calm but something sharp underneath. "3 that we know of. The Calderwood place lost their best quarter horses. Murphy brothers had 2 taken from the north pasture. Now yours." I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated. "Looks like organized rustlers working the territory. Vernon, Marshal Blackridge, he's putting together a group to ride out this afternoon." Delaney nodded slowly. I watched her think, watched calculations happening behind those copper eyes. "They're collecting stock for a big sale," she said. Not a question, just a statement of fact. Probably heading for the New Mexico line, where jurisdiction gets complicated. I blinked. "How'd you figure that?" "It's what I do," she said. Then, before I could ask what she meant, she added, "I'll need to see the other sites, the places they hit. Might be something to learn there." "Marshal Blackridge is meeting with the ranchers in town right now," I said. "You could tell him yourself if you wanted to ride in." She looked past me toward Coyote Ridge, toward the mountains beyond, toward country I couldn't see, but she clearly could in her mind's eye. "I need to secure my remaining stock first," she said finally. "Tell the marshal I'll come by later, after I've had a chance to look around here." I nodded and turned to go, got 3 steps before she called after me. "Deputy Arnett?" I turned back. "This wasn't random," she said quietly. "Whoever did this, they knew what they were taking, and they had the tools to do it right." Something in the way she said it made the hair stand up on the back of my neck, like she was seeing things I couldn't, reading a story written in broken locks and missing horses that told her more than just theft. "Yes, ma'am," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. I rode back toward town, and Delaney Frost returned to her cabin. That was the moment, I think now, looking back across 10 years. The moment when the quiet life she'd built started coming apart. Not because she wanted it to, but because some things, once they're part of you, can't be buried no matter how deep you dig. And some men won't let the past stay buried neither. I didn't go straight to town like I'd told Delaney I would. Instead, I rode out to the Calderwood place first, wanting to see the theft site with fresh eyes. Otis Calderwood was the biggest rancher in the valley, ran near about 1,000 head of cattle, and kept a string of horses that were the envy of every spread from here to Santa Fe. The loss of 3 of his best animals had him spitting mad. "Worthless badge-wearing sons of bitches," he said when I showed up, not even bothering to ask why I was there. "Vernon Blackridge couldn't track a bleeding bull through fresh snow, and now you show up what, to take notes?" I bit back my first response and tried for polite. "Just want to look at where they came in, Mr. Calderwood. See if there's anything that might help." He waved a hand, dismissive. "Waste of time. Ground's hard as iron and twice as mean. There ain't no trail to follow." But he let me look anyway, probably figuring it couldn't hurt and might shut me up. The paddock fence had been cut in 3 places. Clean work, same as at Delaney's place. Wire cutters, professional quality. Boot prints in the dust near the water trough, but wind and ranch hands had already trampled most of them. I knelt down anyway, trying to see what Delaney might have seen. trying to read the ground the way she'd seemed to read her own stable floor. All I saw was disturbed dirt and confusion. But there, near the fence post, something caught the light. I picked it up. Another brass button, same scorpion mark. Must have snagged on the wire when they were cutting through. I pocketed it without mentioning it to Calderwood. Wasn't sure why exactly. Just instinct, maybe. Or the feeling that this small detail meant more than I understood yet. By the time I made it to town, the sun was high and hot. Copper Springs baked under it the way it did most days from April through October. The main street was packed dirt that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it didn't. False front buildings lined both sides. General store, bank, saloon, doctor's office, a few others. The marshal's office sat at the far end, a squat adobe building with iron bars on the window and a door that stuck when the weather was wet. Inside, Vernon Blackridge was dealing with an angry crowd. Otis Calderwood had beaten me there, along with the Murphy brothers and half a dozen other ranchers who'd heard about the thefts and wanted answers. Their voices crashed over each other like competing waves, each man trying to be heard over the others. Tracking those horses before the trail goes completely cold. Telegraph Santa Fe, get professional help out here. Worth more than your whole year's salary, Blackridge. Vernon stood behind his desk, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, raising his hands for quiet. At 68, he'd been a lawman longer than I'd been alive. Seen range wars, Indian conflicts, outlaw gangs, and every kind of trouble the territory could throw at a man. He had patience worn smooth by experience. "Gentlemen," he said, voice carrying without shouting, "I understand you're upset, but panic won't bring those horses back." "Neither will sitting on your ass," Calderwood snapped. Vernon's jaw tightened, but he kept his temper. "I'm organizing a posse to ride out this afternoon. We'll cover the most likely routes south and east. Check water sources, look for sign." "With all due respect, Marshal," one of the Murphy brothers spoke up, "those thieves have a 12-hour head start, and there hasn't been rain in 3 weeks. What trail do you expect to find?" It was a fair question, and Vernon didn't have a good answer. I slipped in along the back wall, trying to stay out of the argument, watched Vernon's face as he dealt with men who had money and influence and weren't shy about using either. This was the part of law work they didn't teach you about. The politics, the pressure, the weight of expectation when you knew damn well you couldn't deliver what they wanted. "I'll do my best," Vernon said finally. "That's all I can promise." "Your best isn't worth much," Calderwood muttered. The meeting broke up with nothing solved and everybody angry. The ranchers filed out, still complaining. I waited until the office was empty, except for me and Vernon, before stepping forward. "That went well," I said. Vernon snorted and dropped into his chair. "About as well as expected. Calderwood's been wanting my badge for years. Sees this as proof I'm too old for the job." He looked at me, tired lines deep around his eyes. "You checked the Frost place?" "Yes, sir. Her stallion was taken, same as the others. Professional work, clean cuts, no obvious trail." "How'd she take it?" I thought about how calm Delaney had been, standing in her doorway like losing her most valuable horse was just another Tuesday morning inconvenience. "Better than I would have," I said honestly. She mentioned wanting to look at the other theft sites, see if there was something to learn. Vernon's expression shifted slightly. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or concern. "Did she now?" "Said it looked like they're collecting stock for a big sale. Figured they'd head for the New Mexico line." "She figured that, did she?" Vernon leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Cole, what do you know about Delaney Frost?" I shrugged. "Not much. Widow, keeps to herself, raises exceptional horses. Lost her husband some years back. That's about it." Vernon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If she offers help, you listen. You understand me? Don't dismiss what she says just because she's a woman or because the ranchers won't take her seriously." "Sir? Just trust me on this." He stood reaching for his hat. "I've got to ride out with the posse. You stay in town, keep an eye on things. If Mrs. Frost does come by, you treat her with respect, and you pay attention to what she tells you. There was weight in the way he said it, like he was giving me information without actually saying the words. I nodded. "Yes, sir." Vernon left, and I was alone in the office with questions I didn't quite know how to ask. The afternoon stretched long and quiet. I did paperwork, checked on the 2 prisoners we had in the single cell out back, drunks sleeping off a bender, and watched the street through the window. Around 4 o'clock, Delaney Frost rode into town. She came in from the south, sitting easy in the saddle on a paint mare I recognized from her string. Still dressed in practical work clothes, hat pulled low against the sun. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything unusual, but I found myself watching the way she moved. Smooth, economical, like every motion had purpose. The way she scanned the street without seeming to look at anything in particular. The way her hand rested casual near her hip where a gun belt would sit if she wore one. She tied her horse outside the general store and went in. I should have stayed in the office. Should have minded my own business and let her do her shopping or whatever business brought her to town. Instead, I found myself crossing the street. The general store smelled like coffee and lamp oil and the peppermint sticks old Mr. Hendricks kept in a jar by the register. Delaney stood at the counter, buying ammunition. Not a lot, just a box of .45 cartridges, the kind that fit a Colt revolver. Mr. Hendricks wrapped them in brown paper without comment. He'd been selling supplies in Copper Springs for 30 years and knew better than to ask questions about who bought what. I waited until Delaney turned to leave before speaking. "Mrs. Frost, you got a minute?" She looked at me with those copper eyes, measuring. "Deputy." I was wondering, I said, then stopped, not sure how to ask what I wanted to ask. Finally, I just said it straight. "You seem to know about tracking, about how these thieves might move. I was hoping you could teach me what to look for." Most women would have laughed or been offended or brushed me off. Delaney did none of those things. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because Marshal Blackridge told me to listen if you offered help, and because Calderwood's right. We don't have much to go on. If there's something I'm missing, something I should be seeing, I want to know what it is." She studied me for a long moment. Then, almost to herself, she said, "He told you to listen." "Yes, ma'am." Another pause. Then she nodded once. Decision made. Walk with me. We left the general store and headed down the street toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open country. Delaney didn't say anything at first, just walked with her hands in her pockets and her eyes on the ground. Finally she spoke. "Most people look at dirt and see dirt," she said. "But the ground remembers everything, every step, every movement, every moment of pressure. It tells stories if you know the language." "How do you learn the language?" I asked. "Time, patience, attention." She stopped and gestured at the street beneath our feet. "What do you see here?" I looked down. "Dust, some wagon tracks, hoof prints." "Which hoof prints are fresh?" I studied them. "They all look the same to me, depressions in the dirt, some deeper than others." "I don't know," I admitted. "The edges," she said. "Fresh prints have sharp edges. Wind and weather soften them over time. See there?" She pointed at a set of tracks leading toward the livery. "Those are from this morning. The edges are still crisp, but these, She indicated another set. "These are a day old at least. The wind's already started to blur them." I knelt down, looking closer. She was right. Once she pointed it out, I could see the difference. "That's how you judge age," she continued, "but direction tells you intention. A man riding easy sits different in the saddle than a man running. His horse's gait changes, the depth of the print shifts." She walked on, and I followed. "At the Calderwood place," I said, "I found another button, same as the one you probably found at your stable. Brass, with a scorpion mark." Delaney stopped walking. "Did you show it to anyone?" she asked, voice very careful. "No, wasn't sure what it meant." She turned to face me fully. For the first time since I'd met her, something other than calm showed in her expression. Not fear, exactly. More like recognition of something she'd hoped she wouldn't have to deal with. "Keep it that way," she said. "Don't mention it to Vernon or the ranchers or anyone else." "Why not?" Because that scorpion mark identifies a specific group, men who don't work small or careless. If they're operating in this territory, it means something bigger than horse theft is happening. Who are they? Delaney was quiet for a long moment, weighing something. Then she said, I knew their leader once, long time ago. He's not the kind of man who steals horses for money. He does it for other reasons. What reasons? Revenge, she said quietly. Or bait. Hard to say which yet. The way she said it made my skin prickle, like she wasn't just talking about theory, but about personal history, about things that had happened to her specifically. Mrs. Frost, I said carefully, who are you really? She smiled, but there was no humor in it. Right now, I'm a widow who trains horses. That's all that matters. But before doesn't matter unless it helps us now. She started walking again. The men who took those horses are professionals. They'll have planned escape routes, backup plans, contingencies. A regular posse won't catch them because Vernon will follow the obvious trail, the one they want him to follow. So what do we do instead? We think like they think. Figure out where they really went, not where they made it look like they went. We'd reached the edge of town now, open desert stretched out in all directions, empty and hot and holding secrets in its dust. Can you teach me that? I asked. How to see what they're hiding. Delaney looked at me, really looked at me, like she was measuring whether I could be trusted with something important. Meet me at my ranch tomorrow morning, she said. Before dawn. Bring a canteen and a good horse. I'll show you what I know. Why not just tell Marshal Blackridge? Let him make the decisions? Because Vernon will do what Vernon always does. Form a big group, make lots of noise, follow procedure, and these men will hear him coming from miles away. She paused. But one or two people moving quiet, reading sign careful, might actually find something useful. It made sense. More sense than I wanted to admit, given that it meant going behind Vernon's back. All right, I said, tomorrow before dawn. She nodded and turned to head back toward where her horse was tied. I watched her go, questions piling up in my mind faster than I could sort them. Vernon had said to listen if she offered help. He'd said it like he knew something about her that he wasn't telling me, like there was history there, buried but not forgotten. And the way Delaney had reacted to that scorpion button, not surprised, not confused, but grimly certain, that told me she knew exactly who'd taken her horse. This wasn't random theft. She'd said as much. This was personal. I went back to the marshal's office and sat at the desk, thinking. The brass button sat in my pocket, small and heavy. A scorpion etched in metal, marking men who worked for someone Delaney Frost had known long ago. Outside, the sun started its long slide toward the western horizon. Vernon and his posse would be hours yet, riding in wide circles and finding nothing because the men they were chasing had left trails meant to mislead. But tomorrow, before dawn, I'd meet a woman who seemed to know more about tracking than any lawman I'd ever met. A woman who spoke about reading the ground like it was a book written in a language most people never learned. A woman with secrets that went deeper than widow and horse trainer. I didn't know it then, but that decision to meet her at first light, to trust her knowledge over procedure, to start asking questions about who she really was, that decision changed everything. For her, for me, for Copper Springs, and everyone in it. Because some people carry whole lifetimes in silence. And when that silence finally breaks, the sound it makes can shake the foundations of everything you thought you knew. I was about to learn that lesson the hard way. I met Delaney Frost at her ranch an hour before sunrise. The desert air was cold enough to see your breath, stars still bright overhead, the kind of quiet that makes you want to whisper even when there's nobody to disturb. My horse picked her way careful along the trail to Shadow Crest, and I could smell sage and creosote sharp in the darkness. Delaney was already up, waiting on her porch with 2 tin cups of coffee steaming in the chill. She'd changed into darker clothes, buckskin pants and a shirt that had seen hard use. Her hair was braided tight, and when she moved to hand me a cup, I caught the edge of a gun belt beneath her coat. "You're early," she said. "Didn't want to miss anything." She nodded, approving. Good. Light's the best teacher, but darkness shows you what you need to see first. I didn't understand what she meant until we walked out to her stable. In the pre-dawn gray, she knelt beside the boot prints in the dirt floor and lit a small lantern, keeping it low. The angle of light made the prints jump into sharp relief. Every ridge, every depression, details I'd missed entirely in daylight. Shadow reading, she said quietly. Low light, careful angle. Shows you depth and weight distribution that sunshine washes out. I knelt beside her, watching. This man here, she pointed to a set of tracks near the water trough, favors his left leg. See how the right boot print is deeper? He's compensating for old injury or recent pain, makes him slower on uneven ground. She moved to another set. This one's heavy, not fat necessarily, but carrying weight. Gun belt, ammunition, supplies. A man who plans for trouble. How can you tell all that from boot prints? Because every step tells a story if you read the whole sentence. She stood and led me outside where the first pink light was touching Coyote Ridge. Your grandfather ever teach you to track coal? No, ma'am. My grandfather was a shopkeeper in St. Louis. Mine was Apache, she said simply. Chiricahua band. His name was Terran, which means belonging to summer thunder. He raised me after my parents died. This was more personal information than she'd shared with anyone in Copper Springs, as far as I knew. I stayed quiet, sensing she was leading somewhere. Terran taught me that tracking isn't about following footprints, she continued. It's about understanding the person who made them, their intent, their skill, their fears. A running man leaves different sign than a walking man. A confident man moves different than a scared one. She walked toward the fence line, and I followed. These men who took Ashwind, they were confident but careful, professional. They knew what they wanted and how to get it clean. That tells me organization, planning, experience. Like military? I asked. Like bandits who've been at it a long time and haven't gotten caught. She stopped at the cut fence. But here's what's interesting. They took my horse specifically, left the others in the corral, even though 2 of them are nearly as valuable. Why just Ashwind? That's the question, isn't it? She looked at me directly. Either they were hired to take that exact horse, or someone wanted to send me a message. What kind of message? Delaney was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. The kind that says, I haven't been as invisible as I thought. The sun broke over the ridge, flooding the desert with sudden gold. The temperature wouldn't rise for hours yet, but the promise of heat was in that light. Come on, she said. I'll show you how they really left. We walked south from her property, away from the obvious trail that headed east toward Diamondback Pass. Delaney moved slow, eyes on the ground, occasionally kneeling to examine something I couldn't see. After about 20 minutes, she stopped and pointed. There. I looked, saw nothing but rocks and sparse brush. What am I looking for? Crushed lichen on that stone. See the discoloration? That's from a horseshoe scraping across it, recent, within the last day. She moved to another rock. And here, pebbles displaced from their dust shadows. When a stone sits in one place long enough, the dust around it creates a pattern. Disturb that pattern and you can tell something heavy passed by. I started to see it then, not a trail exactly, but a disturbance. A whisper of passage that most folks would ride right past without noticing. They went south, I said, understanding dawning. Southwest, she corrected, toward the Dragoon Mountains, probably planning to cut through Dead Man's Pass and hit the border crossing at... She stopped mid-sentence, her head tilting slightly, listening. I heard it a second later. Hoofbeats coming fast from the direction of town. We both turned as a rider crested the rise, a woman on a gray mare, riding like she knew the country and wasn't afraid of it. As she got closer, I recognized Dr. Maeve Hollowell, her medical bag tied behind her saddle. Delaney's expression softened slightly. Maeve. The doctor reined in and dismounted in one smooth motion. She was 51, with iron-gray hair and the kind of steady hands that came from years of setting bones and stitching wounds. Her eyes went to Delaney first, assessing, then to me. "Deputy Arnett," she said, nodding. Then to Delaney. "I heard about Ashwind. Came as soon as I could get away." "Nothing to be done now," Delaney said. "He's long gone." "That's not why I'm here." Maeve glanced at me, then back to Delaney. "Can we talk? Privately?" Delaney looked at me. "Cole, why don't you practice reading those tracks we just found? See if you can follow the trail another 100 yards. I'll catch up." I knew a dismissal when I heard one, but I also knew better than to argue. I walked off a respectful distance, close enough to keep them in sight, but far enough that their voices wouldn't carry. Still, I was 22 and curious. I watched them talk. Maeve stood close to Delaney, speaking low and urgent. Delaney shook her head at something, and Maeve gripped her arm. Even from a distance, I could see the concern on the doctor's face. The way she was looking at Delaney wasn't just friend to friend. It was someone who knew the whole truth, trying to protect someone she cared about. After a few minutes, Delaney nodded. Maeve pulled her into a brief embrace, unusual for two women who both carried themselves with such self-reliance, then mounted her horse and rode back toward town. Delaney stood alone for a moment, her back to me, shoulders tight. Then she took a breath, rolled them back, and walked to where I was pretending to study the ground. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Maeve worries," she said simply. "It's her nature." "What does she worry about?" Delaney looked at me, measuring how much to say. "She worries I'm about to do something dangerous, and she's not wrong." "You're going after them," I said. Not a question. "Yes. When Vernon gets back, he'll organize a proper—" "Vernon will do what lawmen always do," Delaney interrupted, not unkindly. "Follow procedure. Form a posse. Make noise. These men will hear him coming from 5 miles off and disappear like smoke." "So you'll go alone." "I work better alone." I thought about that, about a woman in her mid-40s planning to track professional bandits through some of the hardest country in the territory. Alone, at her age. The doubt must have shown on my face because she smiled slightly. "You're thinking I'm too old for this," she said. "I'm thinking it's dangerous even for a young man with a badge and a gun. Age isn't about years, Deputy. It's about what those years taught you." She started walking back toward her ranch. "I've got skills Vernon and his posse don't, and I've got motivation they don't understand." "What motivation?" She stopped and turned to face me. The rising sun was behind her, casting her face in shadow, but I could see her eyes, copper bright and hard as the desert stone around us. 8 years ago," she said, "I made a promise to a dying man, promised I'd stop hunting, stop chasing, build something that lasted." She gestured back toward her ranch. "I kept that promise, built this place from nothing, made something real and good." Her voice dropped lower. "But Ashwind isn't just a horse, Cole. He's proof that I can create instead of destroy, that I can train instead of track, that I can be something other than—" She stopped herself. "Other than what?" I pressed. Delaney was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Other than the woman I was before I made that promise." And with that she walked away, leaving me standing in the growing heat with more questions than I'd started with. I wasn't there for what happened next. Delaney told me about it years later, on a night when the memories were too heavy to carry alone anymore. So I'm telling it the way she told me, as true as I can make it. After Cole left, Delaney returned to her cabin and stood in the quiet for a long time. The sun was fully up now, heating the air, making the tin roof tick and pop as it expanded. Normal sounds of a normal day. Except nothing was normal anymore. She opened the wooden box again and removed Rowan's photograph. He stared back at her, frozen at 35. Forever young in a way she would never be again. Dark hair, easy smile, eyes that had seen hard things but chosen kindness anyway. He wore his marshal's badge in the photo, taken 6 months before Samaran Pass, before everything ended. Delaney carried the photograph to the table and sat down, letting the memories come. She'd spent 8 years keeping them locked away, but now the door was open and there was no closing it. The canyon walls rose steep on both sides, red stone burned by countless summers, carved by flash floods that came once a decade. Beautiful country if you didn't know what waited in it. Delaney rode behind Rowan, both of them tracking a gang that had robbed the Tucson stage and killed the shotgun guard. 3 weeks of pursuit across hard terrain, following sign most trackers would have lost in the first day. But Delaney never lost the trail. She was 38 then, in her prime, with a reputation that made outlaws nervous and other marshals jealous. Shadowstep, they called her. The woman who could track a ghost across bare rock. Rowan twisted in his saddle to look at her. "You're sure they came through here?" "I'm sure," she said, no doubt in her voice. Never any doubt back then. "Feels wrong," he said, scanning the canyon walls. "Too narrow, perfect ambush country." "We've got them running scared," Delaney replied, confidence bright and sharp as a new blade. "They're not thinking tactically anymore. They're just running." She believed that. Believed her own skill had pushed them past planning into panic. She was wrong. The first shot came from high on the left wall. Rowan's horse screamed and went down, throwing him hard. The second and third shots came from the right. Crossfire, professional positioning. Delaney was moving before she hit the ground, rolling behind a boulder as bullets chewed the dirt where she'd been. Her horse bolted, terrified. She came up with her rifle, scanning for targets. There, muzzle flash high on the left wall. She fired, saw a rock explode near the shooter's position, fired again. "Rowan!" she shouted. He was crawling toward cover, dragging his left leg, blood on the stone beneath him. Delaney laid down a covering fire, precise 3-round bursts that kept the shooters' heads down. Rowan made it to the boulder beside her, breathing hard, face pale. "How bad?" she asked, not looking at him, eyes on the canyon walls. "Bad enough," he said through gritted teeth. More shots. The canyon turned into thunder, echoes crashing over echoes. Delaney counted shooters by sound. 4, maybe 5, all positioned before they'd arrived. This wasn't panic, this was planning. They'd been herded here, led like cattle to slaughter. The realization hit like cold water, all her confidence, all her certainty. It had made her predictable, made her exactly what they needed her to be. "We need to move," she said. "Back the way we came. I'll cover you." "I can't walk, Del," Rowan said quietly. She looked at him then, really looked. The blood wasn't slowing. His pants were soaked with it. "Yes, you can," she said, hearing the edge of fear in her own voice. "You just need—" An explosion of pain across her right shoulder knocked her sideways. The rifle fell from her hands. She gasped, couldn't get air, couldn't think through the white-hot agony radiating from where the bullet had carved through muscle and bone. Rowan dragged her further behind the boulder with strength he shouldn't have had. His hands pressed against her shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me," he said. "Del, stay with me." The shooting had stopped. In the terrible silence that followed, she heard boots on stone, the shooters descending, confident now, knowing they'd won. "Take this," Rowan said, pressing his revolver into her left hand, her offhand, clumsy but functional. "When they come around that boulder, you shoot until it's empty. Then you run. You understand? You run, and you don't look back." "I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are." His eyes held hers, fierce despite the pain. "Listen to me. If we both die here, they win everything. But if you live, you can finish this. You can make it mean something. Rowan, promise me." His hands were shaking now, blood loss making him weak. "Promise me you'll stop after this. No more hunting. Build something that lasts. Be the woman you were before all this blood. Promise." She was crying. "Didn't remember when that started. I promise. Say it. I promise I'll stop hunting. I'll build something that lasts." He smiled, and it was the saddest thing she'd ever seen. "I love you, Delaney Frost. Now when I move, you run, and you don't look back." Before she could argue, before she could think, Rowan Frost stood up. He stood up and stepped into the open, firing his second revolver at the approaching shooters. Drew their attention, gave her the seconds she needed. Delaney ran. Behind her, she heard his gun empty. heard him fall, heard laughter from the men who'd killed him. She ran with blood soaking her shirt and tears blinding her, and the weight of a promise she didn't know if she could keep. 3 days later, barely conscious from blood loss and exposure, she stumbled into a cavalry patrol 40 miles north. 2 weeks after that, recovered enough to ride, she led a federal posse back to Samaran Pass. They found the gang's camp empty, the trail cold. The men who'd killed Rowan Frost had vanished into the borderlands, including one she'd later identify from intelligence reports, Morrow Vane, brother to Ives Vane, whom she'd arrested 6 months earlier. The ambush hadn't been random. It had been revenge, perfectly planned, perfectly executed, and it had worked. Delaney set the photograph down with shaking hands. 8 years. 8 years of keeping that promise. 8 years of building Shadow Crest stone by stone, fence post by fence post. 8 years of training horses with patience instead of breaking them with force. 8 years of being someone different. And now, Morrow Vane had reached across all that time and all that distance and taken the one thing that proved she could be more than a hunter. The question was whether she could get Ashwind back without becoming Shadowstep again, or if that distinction even mattered anymore. She stood, tucked the photograph back in the box, and began to prepare. By noon, Vernon and his posse rode back into Copper Springs with nothing to show for their effort. I watched from the marshal's office as they came up the street, horses tired and men frustrated. Vernon's face was set in hard lines, the kind that came from knowing you'd been outplayed. He dismounted slow, like his bones hurt, and walked into the office without a word. Sat down heavy in his chair and stared at nothing for a minute. "No trail?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Oh, there was a trail," he said bitterly. "Led us east for 12 miles, straight into canyon country, where the tracks just ended, like the horses sprouted wings and flew away." He rubbed his face. "They knew exactly where to take us. Knew we'd follow the obvious path." "What about the other direction? South, toward where, Cole?" He looked at me, tired. "The Dragoon Mountains? That's 200 square miles of bad country with 1,000 places to hide. We don't have the manpower or the time to search it all." I thought about what Delaney had shown me that morning. The crushed lichen, the displaced stones, the trail that wasn't a trail unless you knew how to read it. What if someone did know where to look? I said carefully. Vernon's eyes sharpened. Did Mrs. Frost find something? She found the real trail, the one they didn't want anyone to follow. Vernon was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Where is she now?" "Don't know. She was at her ranch this morning teaching me basic tracking. Then Dr. Hollowell came by and they talked private. After that, Mrs. Frost said she needed to prepare some things." "Prepare." Vernon stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. "Cole, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to keep it to yourself. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." He turned to face me. "Delaney Frost used to be a federal marshal, one of the best trackers the territory ever had. She worked cases nobody else could crack, brought in fugitives other agents gave up on. They called her Shadowstep. I kept my face neutral, like this was news. What happened? She got married to another marshal, Rowan Frost. Good man, from what I heard. They were tracking a gang that had killed during a robbery. Led them into an ambush up at Samaran Pass. Rowan died. Delaney survived, but quit the service afterward, dropped off the map entirely. Until she showed up here, I said. Until she showed up here 8 years ago, calling herself by her married name, asking about land for sale. Bought that hardscrabble ranch south of town and kept to herself. Vernon paused. I recognized her after about a month. She asked me not to tell anyone, and I agreed. Figured a woman has a right to start over if she wants. And now? Now I'm worried she's going to stop starting over and go back to being what she was. Which means riding into danger alone because she doesn't trust anyone else to do it right. He looked at me directly. Did she say she was going after them? I hesitated. Loyalty to Vernon pulled one way, but something about Delaney pulled another. She said she works better alone, I admitted. Vernon swore quietly. She's going to get herself killed. Those men aren't random thieves, Cole. If they targeted her specifically, if they know who she is, then this is personal. And personal makes people stupid. Or motivated, I said. Same thing in my experience. We stood in silence for a moment. Outside, the town went about its business. Freight wagons rolled past. Women with market baskets walked toward the general store. Normal life, continuing like nothing was wrong. "What do we do?" I asked finally. Vernon thought about it. "We give her until tomorrow morning. If she hasn't come back by then, we ride out to Shadowcrest and see what we find." In the meantime, the door opened and Otis Calderwood walked in without knocking. "I want an update, Blackridge," he said without preamble. "Please tell me you found my horses." Vernon's jaw tightened. "No, Mr. Calderwood, the trail went cold." "Cold?" Calderwood's face flushed red. "3 of my best animals, worth more than you make in 5 years, and the trail went cold. This is exactly why the valley needs professional law enforcement, not what?" Vernon's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Go ahead and finish that sentence." Calderwood had enough sense to back off slightly. "I'm just saying, maybe it's time to bring in territorial marshals, real professionals." "I am a real professional," Vernon said quietly, "and I'm doing everything I can with the resources I have." "Well, it's not enough." They stared at each other, tension thick as summer heat. I was about to try to diffuse it when Calderwood added, almost as an afterthought, "What about that Frost woman? I heard she knows something about tracking." "Mrs. Frost has been helpful," Vernon said carefully. "She identified some sign we might have missed." "Then put her to work. Pay her if you have to. My horses are worth more than pride." Calderwood turned to leave, then stopped. "And Blackridge? If I don't see results soon, I'll be talking to the territorial governor about a change in leadership." After he left, Vernon sat down again and put his head in his hands. "I'm getting too old for this," he muttered. I didn't know what to say to that. So I stayed quiet and watched the afternoon shadows lengthen across the office floor. Delaney left Shadowcrest Ranch 2 hours before sunset. She rode a strong Appaloosa mare, not as fast as Ashwind, but steady and sure-footed in rough country. Her saddlebags were packed light but complete. Water, jerky, ammunition, her tracking tools, the beaded leather pouch her grandfather had given her, and the Colt revolver, no longer hidden but worn openly at her hip. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving, didn't ask permission, or wait for Vernon's blessing. Just locked her cabin, checked her remaining horses one last time, and rode south into country that would kill you if you didn't respect it. The sun was setting behind her, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Beautiful and deadly in equal measure. She picked up the real trail about 2 miles from her ranch, the one heading southwest toward the Dragoons. Followed it careful and slow, reading sign that got easier the farther she went from town. The thieves had stopped being quite so careful once they thought they were clear. Boot prints in sandy washes, crushed vegetation where they'd stopped to rest, horse droppings that told her they were still about a day ahead, moving steady but not rushed, confident. That was the word. They thought they'd gotten away clean. As darkness fell, Delaney made a cold camp in a wash sheltered by overhanging rocks. No fire. The light would carry for miles in this empty country. She ate jerky and hard biscuit, drank sparingly from her canteen, and watched the stars come out. This was familiar. The solitude, the calculation, the hunt. It felt like coming home to a house you'd sworn you'd never enter again. She slept lightly, woke before dawn, and was moving again as the first gray light touched the eastern sky. The trail led deeper into the badlands, toward a maze of canyons locals called Devil's Playground, perfect hiding country. Hundreds of ravines and box canyons, natural caves, places where 10 men could disappear and 50 couldn't find them. By mid-morning, Delaney had reached the edge of the canyon network. She dismounted and studied the ground with new intensity. This was where things would get complicated. The main trail split 3 ways. An obvious choice for anyone tracking multiple horses, they'd divided up to confuse pursuit. But Delaney wasn't anyone. She spent 20 minutes studying each split, looking at depth of prints, fresh displacement of stones, broken spiderwebs still trembling slightly in one path. Finally, she chose the middle trail, the one that looked least used, because professionals would take the path that seemed least likely. The canyon walls rose around her as she led her horse deeper. The temperature dropped, shade making the air 10 degrees cooler. Her breathing echoed slightly in the narrow space. After an hour, the trail opened into a small amphitheater canyon, and there, tucked against the far wall, she saw what she was looking for. Hoof prints, recent ones. 3 horses at least, maybe 4, and something else, boot prints. But these were different from the ones at her ranch, lighter, made by moccasins rather than boots, moving with a different rhythm, a different purpose. Someone else was tracking the thieves. Delaney knelt and examined the prints closely. The pattern was familiar. Cherokee or Navajo, hard to say which. Whoever made them knew how to move quiet and read sign well, very well, maybe as well as her. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. She was being watched. "You can come out," she said without turning around. "I know you're there." Silence. Then, from behind a cluster of boulders to her left, a man stepped into view. He was maybe 40, lean and hard, with long dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a mix of traditional and frontier clothing, buckskin pants, cotton shirt, a beaded vest. A rifle rested easy in his hands, not pointed at her, but not pointed either. They studied each other across 20 feet of canyon floor. "You're a long way from town, Sayora," he said finally. His English was perfect, with barely a trace of accent. "So are you," Delaney replied. "I have business here." "Same," he tilted his head slightly. "You're tracking the men who took the horses from the valley ranches. One horse in particular, Silver Dun Mustang. You seen him?" "I've seen the tracks. 4 men, 11 horses." He paused. "But I'm not tracking the horses. What are you tracking?" The man was quiet for a moment, weighing how much to tell her. "There's been a pattern of murders across the territory. Indigenous women, taken from their homes or camps, bodies found weeks later. 7 victims in 3 years. Delaney felt something cold settle in her stomach. "And you think these men are connected?" "I think one of them is the killer. I've been following the gang for 2 months, trying to identify which one." He looked at her directly. "My name is Cairo Sawmill. I'm an investigator for the Navajo Nation, working with tribal authorities." Delaney Frost. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "I've heard that name. You're the one they used to call—" "Used to," she interrupted. "Past tense." Cairo smiled slightly. "Past has a way of catching up, especially out here. Why haven't you taken your information to the territorial marshals?" "Because territorial marshals don't care much about dead Indian women," he said flatly. "No offense if you're one of them. I'm not anymore." They stood in the canyon quiet, taking each other's measure. Finally Cairo said, "You're going after them alone." "Yes." "That's dangerous. I'm aware." "So am I." He shifted his rifle slightly. "Which is why I'm going to ask you a question, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. Are you here for justice or revenge?" Delaney thought about Rowan dying in that canyon, about 8 years of promises kept and lives built, about Ashwind running somewhere ahead, stolen by men who'd killed her husband. "Both," she said finally. "But justice comes first." Cairo studied her for a long moment. Then he lowered his rifle completely. "I believe you, and I think we might help each other. How do you figure? You want your horse back. I want the man who killed my sister." His voice stayed level, but something dark moved behind his eyes. "She was the first victim 3 years ago. Her name was Aita. She was 16. Delaney understood then. This wasn't just investigation for him. This was personal, the same way Ashwind was personal for her. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. Cairo nodded. "Cairo, will you work with me? We track better together than apart." Delaney considered. She'd spent 8 years working alone, trusting nobody, needing nobody. It was safer that way, simpler. but Cairo had skills she recognized. And if there really was a killer among the gang, then this was bigger than stolen horses. "All right," she said, "but I lead. My territory, my rules." "Fair enough." Cairo walked closer, extending his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm, calloused from hard work and hard living. "There's a box canyon about 2 miles southwest," he said. "Natural spring, good shelter. The men we're tracking stopped there yesterday. Based on the sign, they're planning to rest the horses before pushing toward the border." "How many are there?" 4 riders. The leader is a man named Marrow Vane. Ever heard of him?" Delaney's expression went very still. "I've heard." "You know him?" "I arrested his brother 8 years ago. Ives Vane. He died in territorial prison 6 months later." Cairo's eyes narrowed. "So Marrow has reason to hate you?" "Yes." "And you think he took your horse knowing who you were?" "I'm certain of it." They looked at each other, and Delaney saw Cairo putting the pieces together the same way she had. This wasn't random. This wasn't just theft. This was bait. "He wants you to come after him," Cairo said quietly. "Yes. Which means he's expecting you, planning for it." "Probably." "And you're going anyway." Delaney smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I spent 8 years hiding from what I was, being someone small and quiet and safe. But you know what I learned, Cairo? You can't bury parts of yourself without killing the whole thing." She looked toward the canyon mouth, toward the trail leading deeper into Devil's Playground. "Marrow Vane thinks he knows who I am because he knew who I was. But 8 years changes people. I'm not the woman who let arrogance walk her into an ambush, and I'm not the woman who runs scared from hard choices." "Who are you then?" Delaney checked her Colt, made sure her canteen was secure, and swung back into the saddle. "I'm both of them," she said. "The widow and the hunter, the woman who builds and the woman who tracks. And Marrow Vane is about to learn that makes me more dangerous than either one alone." Cairo mounted his own horse, a sturdy paint that looked like it could run all day without complaint. "Lead on then," he said. "Let's go get your horse and my justice." They rode deeper into Devil's Playground as the sun climbed higher, 2 hunters tracking 2 different kinds of prey but moving with the same purpose. Behind them, back in Copper Springs, Vernon Blackridge was organizing another search party. He wouldn't find anything because he was looking in the wrong places. And ahead, in a box canyon with a seasonal spring, Marrow Vane and his men waited. Some of them knew Delaney Frost was coming. One of them was a killer who thought he was safe. And all of them were about to discover that the past doesn't stay buried. It comes back, sometimes quiet, like a widow leading a horse through badlands, sometimes loud, like thunder rolling across desert stone, but it always comes back. We rode through country that got harder the deeper we went. Cairo, that's how Delaney told it to me. Cairo led them through passages so narrow their horses had to turn sideways, through washes that would become death traps in a flash flood, through places where the rock walls rose so high the sky became a blue ribbon far above. He knew this land, knew it the way Delaney knew tracking, complete and certain. "You've been here before," she said after they navigated a particularly tight section. "Many times. My people used these canyons for generations, long before the Spanish came, before the territorial lines were drawn." He glanced back at her. "This is holy ground for us, which makes what happened here worse." "What happened?" Cairo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you want to hear about my sister, or would you rather I keep it to myself?" "Tell me," Delaney said. "If we're hunting together, I should know what drives you." They stopped to rest the horses in a shaded alcove. Cairo pulled out his canteen, took a careful drink, and began. "Aida was born in summer, during the hottest part of July. My mother said she came into the world fighting. Wouldn't cry at first, just looked around like she was taking inventory of everything she needed to conquer." He smiled at the memory, and Delaney saw the grief beneath it. "She was smart, smarter than me, that's for certain. Learned English and Spanish by the time she was 10, could read and write better than most white folks, had plans to become a teacher to help our people navigate the world that was swallowing us up. What happened to her? Delaney asked gently. 3 years ago, she rode to a trading post about 15 miles from our settlement, going to buy fabric for a dress she was making. Never came home. Cairo's hands tightened on his canteen. We searched for 2 weeks, the whole community, every canyon, every wash, every place she might have gone. Finally found her in a ravine about 30 miles from where she'd disappeared. Been dead for days. I'm sorry, Delaney said. The territorial marshal who investigated said it was probably bandits, random violence, said there wasn't much he could do, seeing as there was no trail and no witnesses. Cairo's voice went hard. Told us to accept it and move on, like she didn't matter, like her life was worth less because of the blood in her veins. But you didn't accept it. No, I started investigating on my own, asked questions, followed rumors, tracked down anyone who might have seen something. Took me a year to find a pattern. 6 other women, all indigenous, all taken from remote areas and killed the same way. He pulled something from his pocket, a small beaded bracelet worn and faded. Aida made this when she was 12. Gave it to me before she left that day. Said it would bring me luck. He stared at it. I've been carrying it for 3 years, waiting for the day I could give her justice. Delaney understood that kind of carrying, the weight of promises and memories, the burden of the dead. You said you tracked the pattern to Vane's gang, she said. Yes, all 7 killings happened in areas where his gang was operating. At first I thought it was just coincidence. Bad men travel through bad country. But then I started looking at the timeline more carefully. Cairo showed her a small journal filled with notes and dates. Each killing happened within 3 days of a robbery or rustling operation by Vane's gang, always in the same general area, too consistent to be random, which means one of his men is the killer, yes, and I think I know which one. Cairo flipped through his journal to a sketch, a lean man with cruel eyes and ornate spurs, Neograves. He's a tracker for Vane, good with horses, better with covering trails. I've been trying to get close enough to confirm, but you can't infiltrate alone, Delaney finished. Too risky. Exactly. Which is why your arrival might help. If we're both tracking them, we can coordinate, watch different angles. And when the time comes, we take them all, Delaney said. Your killer and my horse thief. They sat in silence for a moment, 2 people bound by loss and the need to make it mean something. Can I ask you a question? Cairo said finally. Go ahead. Why is this horse so important? I mean, I understand it's valuable, but you're risking your life for it. There's more to it than money. Delaney looked out at the canyon, at the hard beauty of stone and sky. 8 years ago, I made a promise to stop hunting people, to build something instead of destroy. Ashwind was part of that building. I found him as a foal, orphaned, half wild. Could have broken him the fast way, the way most folks do. But I decided to do it different, to earn his trust instead of force his submission. She paused, remembering. Took 2 years, 2 years of patience and consistency and proving I wouldn't hurt him. When he finally let me ride him willingly, it felt like proof. Proof I could be something other than a woman who tracked fugitives and killed when necessary. Proof I could create instead of chase. And Vane taking him is him saying I can't escape what I was. That building is pointless because destruction will always find you. Delaney looked at Cairo. I need to prove him wrong, not just for the horse, but for everything that horse represents. Cairo nodded slowly. I understand that. Aida wanted to build too, wanted to create something better for our people. And someone took that away from her, like her dreams didn't matter, like she didn't matter. They mattered, Delaney said firmly, and we're going to make sure everyone knows it. They mounted up and rode on, deeper into Devil's Playground, following a trail that was getting fresher with every mile. I learned all this later, of course, heard it from Delaney over the years and from Cairo when he'd passed through town. But even hearing it secondhand, I could feel the weight of it. 2 people carrying dead loved ones like stones in their pockets. 2 people who'd spent years trying to build new lives only to have the past reach out and drag them back. But here's what I learned watching them work together over the next few days. Sometimes going back isn't the same as giving up. Sometimes you have to return to who you were to become who you're meant to be. And sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to finish what they started, even if it means walking through fire to do it. That's what Delaney and Cairo were doing there in those canyons, walking through fire together. And ahead of them, in a box canyon with good water and bad men, Marrowvane was waiting. He thought he knew what was coming. He was wrong. By the time Vernon Blackridge realized Delaney Frost was gone, she was already 2 days deep into Devil's Playground with a Navajo tracker at her side and vengeance burning quiet in her chest. I learned what happened next from both of them. Delaney and Cairo, piecing together their separate tellings into something close to truth. So I'll tell it the way they lived it, out there in country that doesn't forgive mistakes. The second day of tracking brought them to a narrow canyon that opened into a wider valley. Red stone walls rose 300 feet on either side, and at the bottom, where centuries of runoff had carved a channel, there were signs of recent passage. Many horses, moving slow, not rushed. Delaney dismounted and studied the ground while Cairo watched the canyon rims. They'd developed a rhythm by now. She read the earth, he watched for ambush. 2 skills that complemented each other like hands working together. 11 horses, she said, kneeling beside a cluster of prints. They stopped here to water them. See how the prints overlap, mill around? They were here for at least an hour. When? Cairo asked, eyes still scanning high ground. Yesterday afternoon, maybe 18 hours ago. She moved to where the trail continued. They're getting comfortable, not worried about pursuit anymore. Or they're setting another trap. Delaney stood and looked at him. You think like a man who's been betrayed before. I think like a man who knows what confidence looks like, Cairo replied. And these men are confident. Too confident for people running from the law. They followed the trail deeper. The canyon walls narrowed again, creating natural choke points that made Delaney's skin prickle. This was the kind of country where you died quick if you weren't careful. Around midday, they found the first campsite. It was in a sheltered alcove off the main canyon, protected from wind and prying eyes. The ashes of a fire, still faintly warm when Delaney tested them. Coffee grounds scattered near a flat rock, boot prints in the sand, and something else. Cairo found it first, a small leather pouch hidden under a pile of stones, like someone had buried it but marked the spot for later retrieval. He opened it carefully. Inside were personal items, a woman's ring, a beaded hair clip, a small photograph in a tin frame. His hands started shaking. Cairo? Delaney moved closer. He pulled out the photograph. A young Navajo woman smiled at the camera, her hair adorned with the same beaded clip now resting in Cairo's palm. Aida, he whispered. Delaney felt something cold settle in her stomach. Your sister? He nodded, unable to speak. There are other items here, Delaney said gently, looking in the pouch. This ring, this bracelet. Do you recognize them? No, but they're all indigenous work. Different tribes, but all from women. Cairo's voice had gone flat, the way voices do when emotion is too big to show. He keeps trophies, which means we've found our killer. Cairo closed his fist around the beaded clip. Neo Graves. It has to be. He's the one who scouts ahead, who knows the country, the one who'd have opportunity. Can we prove it? This is proof. Cairo held up the pouch. These are his trophies, hidden here because he couldn't risk keeping them in camp where the others might find them. Delaney thought about that. About a man so confident in his violence that he kept mementos, visited them like some men visit graves. The psychology of it made her sick. We need to be smart about this, she said. If we take him now, the others scatter. Vane gets away, and you never get real justice. Justice? Cairo's laugh was bitter. I don't want justice, Delaney. I want him dead. I know. But think about the other families. 6 other women, 6 other sets of people who need answers. If we do this right, we get answers. We get proof for the territorial courts. We make sure everyone knows what happened to their daughters and sisters. Cairo was quiet for a long moment, struggling with demons she understood too well. The need for immediate vengeance versus the harder path of real justice. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. We do it right. We take the pouch as evidence, but we don't confront him yet. We follow them to wherever they're planning to meet, and then we take all of them at once." Agreed. Cairo tucked the pouch carefully into his saddlebag, handling it like the sacred evidence it was. "But when the time comes, Neo Graves is mine." "When the time comes," Delaney said, "he's yours." They rode on, following the trail that led deeper into the maze of canyons. 2 hours later, they reached high ground overlooking a box canyon. Delaney pulled out her spyglass, the brass one she'd carried for 15 years, and studied what lay below. The box canyon was maybe 200 yards across, with steep walls on 3 sides and a single entrance where they now watched from. A seasonal spring bubbled up in the center, creating a small pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. Good grass grew there, and the horses, 11 of them, just as the tracks had promised, grazed content. 4 men sat around a small fire. Even from this distance, Delaney recognized Marrow Vane. He'd aged in 8 years, gray in his beard now, lines deeper around his eyes. But the same hard confidence in the way he sat, the same economy of movement. A man who'd survived by being smarter and meaner than most. To his left sat a younger man, probably mid-30s, with expensive boots and a gun belt that spoke of money. Corso Vale, if Delaney's intelligence was right. Vane's second in command and the brains behind their logistics. The third man was heavy-set, moving with the careful deliberation of someone nursing old injuries. Beck something. She didn't have a full name for him. And the fourth, lean, cruel-eyed, wearing ornate silver spurs, that had to be Neo Graves. "There," Cairo whispered, pointing. "The one by the horses. That's him." Delaney adjusted the spyglass. Neo was checking the animals, running his hands down their legs, looking for injuries or problems. Professional work, the work of a man who knew horses. And there, separated slightly from the others, tied to a cottonwood with extra care, Ashwind. The silver-dun Mustang looked tired, but unharmed. His coat caught the afternoon light, turning it into something between silver and smoke. Beautiful, powerful, everything she'd spent 2 years creating. "I count 4 men," Cairo said. "We're outnumbered 2 to 1. 3 to 1 if you count experience," Delaney replied. "These aren't ranch hands or petty thieves, they're professionals." "So what do we do?" Delaney lowered the spyglass and thought. Charging in would get them killed. Waiting too long might mean Vane moved again. They needed an advantage. "We watch," she said finally. "Learn their routine, see if they split up for guard duty or scouting, find a weakness we can exploit. And if they don't have one, everyone has one. We just have to be patient enough to see it." They settled in to watch, taking turns with the spyglass as the sun crawled across the sky. As evening fell, the men below built up their fire and started preparing food. Delaney and Cairo could smell meat cooking, could hear occasional laughter carried on the wind, men who thought they were safe. Then something changed. An argument started. Delaney couldn't hear the words, but she could see the body language. Corso Vale standing up, gesturing angrily. Neo Graves pushing back. Marrow Vane stepping between them, hands raised. "What's that about?" Cairo murmured. "Don't know. But tension in the ranks is good for us." The argument went on for several minutes before Vane seemed to settle it. Corso stalked off toward the horses, and Neo sat back down with his back rigid. As darkness deepened, one of the men, Beck, took a rifle and walked toward the canyon entrance. "Guard duty." "There's our pattern," Delaney whispered. "They're posting watches." Which means they're worried about something. Or someone. They watched as Beck settled into a position near the entrance where he could see anyone approaching. Good tactical placement. These men knew what they were doing. Cairo touched Delaney's arm and pointed. Corso Vale had moved to where Ashwind was tied and was doing something with the horse. Checking something. Looking for something. "What's he doing?" Cairo asked. "I don't know." Through the spyglass, Delaney watched Corso run his hands along Ashwind's neck, down his shoulders, along his flanks. Not the way you check for injury, the way you search for something hidden. Then Corso pulled something from his saddlebag, a map or document hard to tell in the failing light, and studied it while standing next to Ashwind. "That's strange," Delaney murmured. "What?" "The way he's looking at the horse, like Ashwind's a puzzle he's trying to solve." They watched for another hour as full darkness fell. The men below settled in for the night, Beck remaining on guard at the entrance. The fire burned down to coals. "We should rest," Cairo said quietly. "Take turns keeping watch. If we're going to move against them, we need to be sharp." Delaney nodded. They retreated from the canyon rim to a sheltered spot about 100 yards back where they could rest without being seen. "You take first watch," she said. "Wake me in 3 hours." But sleep didn't come easy. Delaney lay on her bedroll, staring at the stars through a gap in the canyon walls, thinking about what she'd seen. About Corso searching Ashwind, about the argument, about the way Vane kept looking at the horse like it was more valuable than simple theft warranted. Something wasn't adding up. Cairo woke her just before midnight. "Your watch," he said quietly. "Nothing's changed down there. Beck's still on guard, but he's getting sloppy, keeps nodding off." "Good to know." Delaney sat up, shaking off the thin sleep she'd managed. "Get some rest." She took up position where she could see the canyon below. The moon was up now, nearly full, painting everything in silver-blue light, beautiful and eerie in equal measure. The camp below was quiet except for Beck's occasional movement near the entrance. Delaney settled in to watch, her mind working through scenarios. How to approach, when to strike, what the risks were. Then she heard it, footsteps, soft but distinct, coming from the direction of the canyon. She drew her Colt in one smooth motion and pressed back against the rock wall. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, moving with purpose. Corso Vale. He walked past her hiding spot not 10 feet away, so close she could have reached out and touched him. He carried something, the same document she'd seen him studying earlier. Delaney's mind raced. Corso was supposed to be in camp. What was he doing up here? She waited until he'd passed, then followed at a careful distance. Corso walked for about 5 minutes before stopping at a flat area with good moonlight. He spread the document on a rock, a map she could see now, and studied it intently. Delaney crept closer, using shadows and stone for cover until she could see over his shoulder. It was an old map, hand-drawn, showing terrain she recognized as the area around Samaran Pass. And there, marked with an X and notes in Spanish, was a location labeled Tesoro de Plata. Silver treasure. Delaney felt understanding click into place like a key turning in a lock. This wasn't about the horse. Not really. This was about Spanish gold. Corso muttered something to himself, then pulled out a small notebook and began making calculations. Distance, direction, landmarks. Delaney watched, pieces falling together. 8 years ago, when Rowan had been tracking Ives Vane, there had been rumors, old stories about Spanish treasure hidden in the canyons near Samaran Pass. Most folks dismissed it as legend, prospectors' dreams and campfire tales. But Rowan had mentioned it once, casual-like, talking about the country they were covering. Said the old-timers swore there was silver cached somewhere, hidden by Spanish soldiers fleeing Apache raids centuries back. If Morrow Vane had heard those same rumors, if he thought Ashwind could somehow lead him to it. "Idiota," Corso said to himself, shaking his head. "A horse cannot remember gold." Delaney's breath caught. Corso didn't believe the legend. He thought Vane was chasing a fairy tale, which meant Vane had sold his men on a false premise, had convinced them, or tried to convince them, that Ashwind was special, that the silver dun could lead them to treasure. It was insane, but it explained everything. Why target her horse specifically? Why risk coming into settled territory for one animal? Why Vane had planned this so carefully? He was using the horse as bait and treasure map, both. Drawing Delaney out while chasing a legend that probably didn't exist. Corso folded his map and started back toward camp, still muttering. Delaney let him go and retreated to where Cairo was sleeping. "Cairo," she whispered, shaking him awake. "We need to talk." He came alert instantly. "What happened?" "I just learned what this is really about, and it's more complicated than we thought." She explained what she'd seen and heard. The map, the Spanish notes, Corso's skepticism. Cairo absorbed it, then said, "So Vane isn't after the horse for money. He thinks it can lead him to treasure." "Yes, which is insane, but men have died for less insane reasons." Cairo sat up fully. "This actually works in our favor." "How?" "If Vane is focused on treasure and Corso doesn't believe in it, there's division in the camp. Men who follow orders they think are foolish are men who make mistakes." Delaney nodded slowly. "And Neo?" "Neo's here for different reasons. He's using Vane's operation as cover for his hunting. As long as Vane keeps moving through remote country, Neo has access to isolated victims. So we have 4 men with 3 different agendas. Vane chasing a legend, Corso wanting to get paid and leave, Neo killing for pleasure. And Beck? Beck just follows orders. He's the simple one." They sat in the darkness, planning. "Here's what we do," Delaney said finally. "We wait until they move. Vane will want to take Ashwind to wherever he thinks the treasure is, probably near Samaran Pass based on that map. When they're on the move, strung out and vulnerable, we take them." "What about Neo's trophies? The evidence?" "We get that first, before they move, tonight while they're sleeping." Cairo's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. "You want to raid their camp?" "Just Neo's saddlebags. Get the pouch, get evidence. Then we have leverage for the territorial courts and proof for the families." "That's dangerous." "Everything about this is dangerous." Delaney checked her Colt. "But if we're careful, if we move like ghosts, we can do it." "When?" 2 hours before dawn, deepest part of sleep. Beck will be tired from his watch. The others will be dead to the world." Cairo thought about it, then nodded. "All right, but I'm coming with you." "No, you watch my back from up here. If something goes wrong, you provide cover fire and we run like hell." "Delaney, this isn't negotiable, Cairo. I've done this kind of work for 15 years. You haven't. I need you in position to help if it goes bad, not getting killed trying to keep up with me in the dark." He didn't like it, but he accepted it. "Fine, but if you're not back in 30 minutes, I'm coming after you." "Deal." They waited as the moon traced its arc across the sky and the temperature dropped toward the bone cold that comes before dawn. At 4 in the morning, when the world was darkest and coldest, Delaney Frost became Shadowstep again. She moved down the canyon wall like water flowing over stone, silent, inevitable, guided by gravity and skill in equal measure. Her moccasin boots made no sound on the rock. Her breathing was controlled to the point of imperceptible. This was the skill that had made her legend, not the shooting, not the tracking. This. The ability to be where she shouldn't be, see what she shouldn't see, and disappear before anyone knew she'd been there. Below, the camp slept. Beck had been relieved by Neo around midnight, and now Neo sat near the entrance, supposedly on watch. But his head kept dropping, jerking back up, dropping again. Men aren't meant to stay awake all night. Biology wins eventually. Delaney reached the canyon floor and paused, counting breaths, listening. The horses stirred slightly, but didn't alarm. She'd always had a way with animals. They sensed she wasn't a threat. Ashwind raised his head and looked at her. She pressed a finger to her lips, absurd as that was. The horse nickered softly, recognition clear. She moved to where the men slept. Vane closest to the fire, Corso to his left, Beck beyond him. Their saddlebags and gear were piled near each sleeping form. Neo's bags were by the entrance, where he'd left them when taking watch. Delaney ghosted past the sleeping men, every sense heightened to the point where she could hear their individual breathing patterns. Vane's was deep and steady. Corso's had a slight whistle. Beck snored softly. She reached Neo's position and froze. He was awake, not obviously. His head was still down. His posture still suggested sleep. But his breathing was wrong. Too controlled, too aware. He was faking. Delaney's hand moved to her Colt, but before she could draw, Neo exploded into motion. He rolled and came up with a knife, slashing at where she'd been a heartbeat before. Missed because Delaney was already moving, backstepping, her own gun clearing leather. "Company!" Neo shouted, his voice carrying across the canyon. The camp erupted, Vane rolling out of his bedroll with a pistol already in hand, Corso scrambling for his rifle, Beck sitting up confused, reaching for weapons. Delaney fired twice, not at Neo, but at the ground between them, buying distance. Then she ran. Behind her, Neo gave chase, his knife still in hand, moving fast despite the darkness. Above, Cairo opened fire. His rifle cracked 3 times, precise shots that kicked up dust near Vane and Corso, forcing them to dive for cover instead of shooting at Delaney's fleeing form. Delaney sprinted for the canyon wall where she'd descended, but Neo was faster than she'd expected. He caught up as she reached the first climbing route, grabbed her shoulder, spun her around. The knife came at her throat. She blocked it with her gun barrel, twisted, used his momentum to throw him off balance. They grappled for a moment, both professionals, both knowing a dozen ways to kill quickly. But Delaney was older, and Neo was stronger. He got his knife arm free and stabbed down. The blade caught her left shoulder, cutting deep. She gasped, pain white-hot and immediate. Neo smiled, going for the kill. A rifle shot from above took off his hat and made him duck. Cairo, laying down fire, giving her the seconds she needed. Delaney brought her knee up hard into Neo's groin. As he doubled over, she pistol-whipped him across the temple. He went down hard. She ran, blood streaming from her shoulder, her left arm already going numb. More shots from below. Vane and Corso had found cover and were returning fire toward Cairo's position. Delaney scrambled up the canyon wall, using one arm and her legs, leaving a blood trail she'd worry about later. If there was a later. She reached Cairo's position and collapsed behind cover. "You're hit," he said, already moving to help. "Shoulder. Not fatal." She gasped for breath. "Did you see where Neo went?" "He ran back toward the horses. The others are pinned behind those rocks near the fire." Below, Vane shouted something. Then Corso's voice, angry and scared. "We need to move," Cairo said. "They know we're here now. The advantage is gone." Not entirely. Delaney pulled Neo's saddlebags from where she'd grabbed them during the fight. Got these before he woke up. Cairo opened them. Inside was the leather pouch with the trophies. And more, a journal written in Neo's hand, detailing every kill. Names, dates, descriptions. "Dear God," Cairo whispered, reading. "He documented everything." "Then we have him." Delaney pressed her hand against her bleeding shoulder. "And we have evidence that will stand in any court." A rifle cracked below, and the bullet sparked off rock 2 feet from Cairo's head. "We need to go," he said. "Now, before they flank us or we bleed out." They retreated, moving fast despite Delaney's wound. Behind them, Vane's voice echoed through the canyon. "Delaney Frost, I know it's you. You can't run from what you are." His laughter followed them into the darkness. "He sounds crazy," Cairo said as they reached their horses. "He is crazy," Delaney replied, mounting one-handed. "Crazy and dangerous, which is why we need to be smarter than him." They rode hard for an hour, putting distance between themselves and Vane's camp. When they finally stopped, Cairo insisted on treating Delaney's shoulder. The cut was deep but clean. He packed it with herbs from his medicine pouch, bandaged it tight. "You'll live," he said, "but you need real medical attention. A doctor." "Later. First we finish this." "Delaney—" "They're going to run now," she interrupted. "Vane knows we're here, knows we're hunting him. He'll move fast, probably straight for wherever he thinks that treasure is." "So we follow?" "So we get ahead of him." She pulled out her own map. If Vane's using the Spanish map Corso had, he's heading for this area near Samaran Pass. There's only 2 routes from here to there. If we ride hard, we can beat him to the pass and set up an ambush. You want to ambush Marrow Vane at the same place where my husband died. Yes, Delaney's voice was steady. Seems fitting, doesn't it? Cairo studied her in the pre-dawn light. This isn't just about the horse anymore, is it? It never was. He nodded. All right. We ride for Samaran Pass. We set our ambush, and we end this. But first, Delaney said, holding up Neo's journal, you need to get this to the territorial marshal. Real marshal, not Vernon. Someone who can prosecute. Someone who'll care about 7 dead indigenous women. I'm not leaving you to face Vane alone. You're not. You're going to Copper Springs, giving this evidence to the right people, and then you're riding like hell to catch up with me at Samaran Pass. She looked at him directly. Those families deserve to know the truth, and we can't risk this evidence being lost if things go bad up there. Cairo wanted to argue. She could see it in his eyes, but he also knew she was right. How much of a head start will you give Vane? He asked. Enough to let him think he's escaped. Then I'll shadow him to the pass. She smiled grimly. I've done this before. I know how to follow without being seen. That was before you had a knife wound in your shoulder. I've had worse. They looked at each other, 2 hunters who'd found unexpected partnership in the middle of hard country. When this is over, Cairo said, when we've both got what we came for, we'll sit down and have a proper conversation, Delaney finished. About your sister, about my husband, about everything we've carried alone for too long. Deal. He gathered Neo's journal and the evidence pouch, securing them carefully in his saddlebags. Then he gripped Delaney's good shoulder. Don't die, he said simply. Don't lose that journal. They parted as the sun broke over the eastern rim of the canyon, painting the rocks in shades of gold and red. Cairo rode north toward Copper Springs and Justice. Delaney rode west, following the trail of men who'd stolen more than just a horse. And behind them both, Marrow Vane broke camp and headed toward Samaran Pass, chasing a legend that didn't exist, unaware that the real legend was about to catch up with him. I didn't know any of this was happening. While Delaney tracked Vane through Devil's Playground and Cairo rode hard for Copper Springs with evidence of murder, I was sitting in Vernon's office trying to explain why I thought we should organize another search party. She's been gone 3 days, I said for the 3rd time. 3 days without word. Something's wrong. Vernon leaned back in his chair, looking older than his 68 years. Or something's right. Maybe she found what she was looking for and she's on her way back. You don't believe that? No, he admitted. I don't. Then why aren't we doing something? Because, Cole, I've learned over the years that sometimes the best thing you can do is trust people to handle their own business. He stood and walked to the window. Delaney Frost is one of the most capable people I've ever known. If she's in trouble, it's trouble she chose deliberately. And if she chose it, she's got a plan. That's not very comforting. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be true. We stood in silence for a moment. Then Vernon said, You care about her, more than just professional concern. I barely know her. Sometimes that doesn't matter. Sometimes you recognize something in someone and you care because of what they represent, not because of what they've shared with you. He was right, though I didn't want to admit it. Delaney represented something I'd been searching for without knowing it, the idea that you could be skilled and deadly and still choose mercy. That strength didn't require cruelty. The door burst open and Cairo Sawmill walked in, covered in trail dust and moving like a man who'd ridden 40 miles without stopping. Where's Marshal Blackridge? He demanded. Right here, Vernon said, turning. Who are you? Cairo Sawmill, Navajo tribal investigator. I've got evidence of multiple homicides, and I need someone in authority who'll actually do something about it. Vernon's expression sharpened. Show me. Cairo pulled out Neo's journal and the leather pouch with the trophies, spread them on Vernon's desk. 7 women murdered over 3 years, Cairo said. All indigenous, all killed by the same man, Neo Graves, who rides with Marrow Vane's gang. This journal documents every kill. These items are trophies he kept. Vernon picked up the journal and started reading. His face went gray. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "From Neo's Saddlebags. Delaney Frost and I raided their camp 2 nights ago in Devil's Playground." My head snapped up. "Delaney's with you?" "Was. We split up. She's tracking Vane to Samaran Pass. I came here to make sure this evidence gets into the right hands." Vernon was still reading the journal, page after horrifying page. "This is detailed, specific. It's more than enough for prosecution. If we catch him alive," Cairo said. "But right now Delaney's out there alone, wounded, tracking 4 armed men. She needs help." "Wounded?" I said. "How bad?" "Knife wound to the shoulder, deep but not fatal. I treated it as best I could, but she needs a real doctor." Vernon looked up from the journal. "When did you split up?" "Yesterday morning. She gave me a day's head start to get here. By now she should be close to Samaran Pass, maybe in position." "And Vane?" "Following, thinking he escaped. Delaney's shadowing him." Vernon closed the journal carefully, like he was handling something sacred, which in a way he was. The last testimony of 7 silenced voices. "Cole," he said, "get horses ready. Fresh mounts, full supplies. We ride in 20 minutes. "How many men?" I asked. "Just us 3. Any more and we'll make too much noise." Vernon locked the journal in his desk safe. "This evidence stays here until we get back. I'm not risking it in the field." "What about the territorial marshal?" Cairo asked. "Shouldn't you telegraph?" "I will. After we make sure Delaney Frost doesn't die trying to get justice she thinks she has to earn alone." Vernon was already moving, grabbing his gun belt, his rifle. "Samaran Pass is 6 hours hard ride from here. If we leave now, we might arrive before everything goes to hell." We prepared fast. I'd never seen Vernon move with such purpose, such focus. Whatever doubts he had about his age or his abilities, he set them aside. 23 minutes later, we rode out of Copper Springs, heading west. The sun was high and hot, but we pushed the horses hard, trading speed for caution. Vernon led, reading the country with eyes that had seen it change over 4 decades. Cairo rode with the intensity of a man chasing demons. And I brought up the rear, learning more about real law work in those hours than I had in 2 years wearing a badge. We didn't talk much. Didn't need to. We all knew what we were riding toward, a place where blood had been spilled before, where the past reached out and grabbed the present by the throat. A place where Delaney Frost was preparing to face the man who'd killed her husband and stolen 8 years of her life. And we were racing against time to make sure history didn't repeat itself. Delaney reached Samaran Pass 3 hours before sunset. The canyon looked exactly as she remembered it. Red stone walls rising steep on both sides. The narrow defile where you had to ride single file. The high positions where shooters could rain death down on anyone foolish enough to walk into the trap. She dismounted and stood in the exact spot where Rowan had fallen. The bloodstains were long gone, washed away by 8 years of rain and wind and time. But she could still see them in her mind's eye, could still hear the echo of gunfire, the sound of her own screaming. The memories didn't hurt the way they used to. Time had worn down the sharp edges, turned agony into ache. But they were still there, still part of her. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty canyon. "Sorry I was too confident, sorry I led you here. Sorry I didn't see the trap until it was too late." The wind was her only answer, whistling through the rocks. "But I learned," she continued, "learned that pride gets people killed. Learned that skill without wisdom is just competent violence. Learned to build instead of destroy." She looked around the canyon, seeing it with different eyes now, not as the site of her greatest failure, but as a place, just a place. Geography didn't carry blame. People did. "Vane's coming," she said to the memory of Rowan. "He's coming here chasing a treasure that doesn't exist. And when he arrives, I'm going to end what started here 8 years ago. Not with revenge, with justice." She paused. "I hope you'd approve." Then Delaney Frost, widow and hunter, Shadowstep and builder, set about preparing an ambush. She chose her position carefully, high on the southern wall, with clear sight lines and multiple escape routes. Not the obvious spot, Not where shooters had positioned themselves 8 years ago, somewhere smarter. She checked her rifle, her revolver, her ammunition, made sure her wounded shoulder could handle the recoil, tested different firing positions until she found one that worked. Then she settled in to wait. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows lengthened. The temperature began to drop as evening approached, and then, just as the light started to fade, she heard them coming. 4 horses, moving at a steady pace. Men who thought they were close to something valuable, close to the end of their journey. Vane rode in front, a map in his hands, comparing landmarks to whatever the Spanish document showed. Behind him came Corso Vale, looking skeptical and tired. Then Beck, following orders without question. And at the rear, Neo Graves. Scanning the canyon walls, his hand near his rifle, instincts telling him something was wrong even if he couldn't identify what. They entered the defile. Delaney tracked them with her rifle, finger on the trigger, breathing steady. All she had to do was pull it. 4 shots, 4 men down. Justice delivered from high ground, the way Vane had delivered death to Rowan. But she didn't fire, because that wasn't justice. That was execution. And Delaney Frost had spent 8 years learning the difference. She waited until they reached the center of the canyon, the killing ground, though they didn't know it yet. Then she stood, rifle pointed down, and spoke into the growing darkness. Vane, your journey ends here. 4 heads snapped up. 4 hands went to weapons. But they froze when they saw her silhouette against the darkening sky. 1 woman alone holding the high ground. Delaney Frost, Vane said, and his voice carried something between respect and madness. I wondered when you'd show yourself. You wanted me to follow, so I did. Now let's finish what we started 8 years ago. You mean what I finished, Vane corrected, when I killed your husband in this very canyon. You ambushed an honest lawman and a woman who trusted her own skill too much, but that was then. This is now. Vane laughed. And what's different now? You're still alone, still making the same mistakes. Am I? From positions they'd taken while Vane was distracted, Vernon Blackridge, Cairo Sawmill, and Cole Arnett stepped into view. 3 rifles, 3 targets, perfect crossfire. You're surrounded, Vernon called down. Drop your weapons and put your hands where we can see them. For a long moment nobody moved. Then Corso Vale threw down his rifle and raised his hands. I'm done. This whole thing was insane anyway. Beck followed suit, reading the tactical situation and knowing when he was beaten. But Neo Graves smiled. It was the smile of a man who had nothing to lose and everything to gain from violence. He drew and fired in one motion, not at Delaney or Vernon or Cairo. At Cairo. The bullet caught the Navajo investigator in the chest, throwing him backward, and then all hell broke loose. Cairo went down hard, and for one terrible heartbeat I thought he was dead. Then he rolled, gasping, and I saw the bullet had caught his shoulder, not his chest. Still bad, but not fatal. Not yet. Neo Graves spun his horse and bolted back toward the canyon entrance, firing wildly as he rode. His shots went high and wide. Panic shooting, not aimed fire. Vernon dropped to one knee and returned fire, his rifle cracking 3 times in rapid succession. One bullet sparked off stone near Neo's head. Another took his horse in the haunch. The animal screamed and stumbled. Neo kicked free as it went down, hit the ground running, and dove behind a cluster of boulders. "Cole!" Vernon shouted. "Get Cairo to cover!" I was already moving, sliding down the loose scree on the canyon wall, my boots kicking up dust and small stones. Bullets whined past me. Beck had recovered his rifle and was shooting, though without much conviction. Delaney's rifle spoke from her position high above. Her shot hit the rock 6 inches from Beck's head, and he threw his weapon down for good this time, hands going high. "I'm out," he yelled. "Don't shoot, I'm out." I reached Cairo and dragged him behind an outcrop. Blood soaked his shirt, bright red and spreading fast. "How bad?" I asked, already pulling bandages from my pack. "Bad enough," he gasped. "But I've had worse." "When?" "I'm lying. This is pretty bad." Despite everything, I almost laughed. I packed the wound as best I could with shaking hands while gunfire echoed through the canyon. Above us, Delaney had shifted position, moving along the southern wall like a ghost. She'd learned something in 8 years, how to fight smart instead of confident. Morrow Vane had taken cover behind his dead horse, using the animal's body as a shield. He fired methodically at Vernon's position, keeping the marshal pinned down. And somewhere in the rocks, Neo Graves was hunting. I could feel it, even if I couldn't see him. The way a deer feels a mountain lion before it sees it. Predator instinct, sharp and patient. "Your rifle," Cairo said through gritted teeth. "Give it to me. You're hit, which means I can't run, but I can damn sure shoot." He took the Winchester from my hands with his good arm. "Go. Help Vernon. I'll watch this approach." I didn't want to leave him, but he was right. We needed every gun active. I drew my revolver and moved toward where Vernon had taken position. The marshal was reloading, his movements practiced and smooth despite his age. "Beck's surrendered," I reported. "Corso too. It's just Vane and Neo now." "Neo's the dangerous one," Vernon said. "Vane's predictable. But Neo?" He shook his head. "Watch the high ground. He'll try to circle around, get above us." As if on cue, a rifle cracked from a new position, higher up the northern wall. The bullet took Vernon's hat clean off his head. "There," I pointed. Delaney saw it too. She fired twice, fast and accurate, suppressing Neo's position. Then she called down to us, her voice carrying clear in the canyon acoustics. "Vernon, Vane's trying to reach the horses. Don't let him get to Ashwind." I looked and saw she was right. Vane was making a break for it, running low and fast toward where the horses had scattered when the shooting started. Vernon stood and fired, but Vane was moving too quick, too erratic. The shots missed. Then Delaney did something I'll never forget. She jumped from a ledge 20 feet high, landed in a controlled roll, came up running. Her wounded shoulder had to be screaming, but she didn't slow. Vane reached Ashwind first. The silver dun was rearing, terrified by the gunfire. Vane grabbed the reins, tried to mount. Delaney hit him like a freight train. They went down together, rolling in the dust. Vane was bigger, stronger. But Delaney was trained and desperate. She got her knee on his chest, her Colt pressed against his throat. "Don't move," she said, calm, steady, like she was commenting on the weather. Vane froze, looking up at her. Blood trickled from his lip where her elbow had caught him. "You going to kill me?" he asked. "Like you killed my brother? Your brother died in prison of pneumonia. I arrested him. That's all." "That's everything. He wouldn't have been there if not for you. He wouldn't have been there if he hadn't robbed the Tucson stage and murdered a guard." Delaney pressed the barrel harder against his throat. "Actions have consequences, Morrow. You taught me that 8 years ago when you killed Rowan." From the rocks above, Neo Graves shouted down, "Let him go or I start shooting everyone." We all looked up. Neo had found a perfect position, high ground with clear sight lines to all of us. His rifle swept across the canyon floor. "I can take 3 of you before you get me," he called. "Maybe all 4 if I'm lucky. So here's how this goes. You let Morrow walk and we ride out, or people die. Your choice, Marshal Frost." Delaney didn't take her eyes off Vane. "Except you've got a problem, Neo. You're out of ammunition." "The hell I am. You fired 18 shots. Your rifle holds 15. You reloaded once, which gave you 3 more. That's 18 total, and I counted every one." Silence. "You're bluffing," Neo said, but his voice had gone uncertain. "Only one way to find out." Delaney stood, hauling Vane to his feet but keeping her gun on him. "Fire a shot, Neo. Prove me wrong." More silence. Then Cairo's voice, pained but strong, called up from where he was hidden. "You killed my sister, Neo Graves, and 6 other women. I've got your journal. I've got your trophies. And I've got 7 families who deserve to see you hang." Lies. The beaded hair clip you kept from Aida Sawmill. The silver ring from Maria Blackfeather. The turquoise bracelet from— "Shut up," Neo screamed. And he pulled the trigger. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. "Told you," Delaney said. Vernon was already moving, scrambling up the wall toward Neo's position. I followed, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Neo saw us coming and ran, but he had nowhere to go. The canyon walls boxed him in, and he'd chosen his position for firing lanes, not escape routes. Vernon reached the ledge first, moving with a speed that belied his age. Neo turned to fight, the rifle now a club in his hands. They grappled for a moment, Vernon's experience against Neo's youth. Then Vernon got a hand on Neo's gun belt and yanked hard, pulling him off balance. Neo's boot slipped on loose rock. For one suspended moment, he teetered on the edge of the 30-foot drop. Vernon reached for him. Instinct, the lawman's instinct to preserve life, even when it's life that doesn't deserve preserving. But Neo batted the hand away. "Rather fall than hang," he snarled, and he stepped backward into empty air. The sound he made when he hit the canyon floor was something I hear in nightmares sometimes, wet and final. Cairo struggled to his feet from where he'd been taking cover and limped over to where Neo lay. Looked down at the broken body. "That's for Aita," he said quietly, "and the others." We gathered in the center of the canyon as the last light drained from the sky. Corso Vale and Beck Holler sat with their hands bound, looking defeated and scared. Marrowvein stood apart, Delaney's gun still trained on him, his face unreadable. Vernon climbed down from the high ledge, moving slower now that the adrenaline was fading. He looked every one of his 68 years. I helped Cairo sit against a boulder. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. He needed a doctor soon. "We should make camp here tonight," Vernon said. "Head back to Copper Springs at first light. Cole, gather the horses. Delaney, keep an eye on our prisoners." As I rounded up the scattered animals, I found Ashwind standing alone, still shaking from the gunfire. The silver dun let me approach, seemed to recognize that I meant no harm. "She's been looking for you," I told him, feeling foolish talking to a horse. "Crossed half the territory, got herself shot, all to bring you home." The horse nuzzled my shoulder, and I understood then, not really the horse itself, but what it meant to her. Proof that building was possible. That creation mattered more than destruction. I led Ashwind back to where Delaney stood guard over Vane. When she saw the stallion, something in her expression shifted. Not quite tears, not quite a smile. Something softer than either. "Hey, boy," she said quietly. "You all right?" The horse walked straight to her, ignoring the gun in her hand, the blood on her clothes, the violence that surrounded them. He pressed his forehead against her chest, and she wrapped her free arm around his neck. "I know," she whispered. "I know, but we're going home now." Marrowvein watched this with an expression I couldn't read. Finally he said, "All this for a horse." "No," Delaney replied, not looking at him. "All this to prove I'm not what you tried to make me." "And what's that?" "A killer who can't stop killing. A hunter who can't stop hunting." She looked at him then, direct and unflinching. "You killed Rowan thinking it would break me, and it did for a while. But I rebuilt myself into something you couldn't imagine, someone who chooses when to fight and when to walk away. You didn't walk away from this." "No, because you stole something I built, and that needed answering," she paused. "But I didn't kill you, Morrow, even when I had the chance, even when it would have been justified, because revenge and justice aren't the same thing, and I chose justice." Vane spat in the dust. "Justice is just revenge with a courtroom." "Maybe. But at least it's a choice made in daylight instead of darkness. At least it gives people like Cairo's sister a voice, even if it comes too late to save them." We built a small fire as full darkness fell. Vernon posted me on first watch while he tended to Cairo's wound properly. The bullet had gone clean through the shoulder without hitting bone or major arteries. "You'll have a scar to match Delaney's," Vernon told him, wrapping the bandage tight. "Good," Cairo said. "Scars are memory. They remind us what we fought for." While Vernon worked, Delaney sat apart from the group, still holding Ashwind's reins. The horse stood quiet beside her, occasionally nosing her shoulder like he was checking to make sure she was real. I walked over after my watch rotation ended. "Mind if I sit?" I asked. "Free country," she said, but moved over to make room. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the canyon walls catch and throw back the sound. "You knew Neo was empty," I said finally. "How?" "I didn't. Not for certain." She smiled slightly. "But I knew his type, the kind who fires until there's nothing left, because restraint isn't in their nature. And I knew he'd been shooting wild after his horse went down. Fear shooting, not tactical. Men like that empty their guns fast. But you couldn't be sure." "No," so I bluffed. "And he believed me because guilty men always think everyone knows their secrets." She paused. "Besides, even if I'd been wrong, he was going to shoot anyway. Better to make him waste a round on proving me wrong than saving it for Cairo or Vernon." I thought about that, about the calculations she'd made in a split second, the experience that let her read men like books. "Vernon told me who you used to be," I said. "Shadowstep, the tracker who never lost a trail. That was a long time ago." "Not that long. You're still her. Still that good." Delaney was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When Rowan died, I thought I had to choose. Be the widow or be the marshal. Build or hunt. Live quiet or live dangerous. But I was wrong, Cole. Those aren't opposites. They're just different tools for different moments." "What made you realize that?" "Cairo, partly. Watching him carry his sister's memory while still moving forward. And you, actually." "Me?" "You didn't know who I was, but you trusted my skills anyway. Listened when I spoke. That taught me that who I was doesn't have to define who I am. The shadow and the light can walk together." She looked at the fire, at the men sitting bound and defeated, at Cairo resting with his wound bandaged. "I spent 8 years trying to bury Shadowstep," she continued. "Thought that was the only way to keep Rowan's promise. But tonight, I kept that promise better than I ever did before." "How do you figure?" "I built something that lasts, not just the ranch or the horses, but a way of living where strength serves justice instead of pride, where skills save people instead of just catching them." She gestured toward Cairo. "He gets closure for his sister, 7 families get answers, and Vane doesn't get to kill anyone else. That's building something, even if it came through violence." I understood then, or started to, the difference between revenge and justice, between killing because you can and fighting because you must. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we take them back. Face trial. Let the law work the way it's supposed to." She looked at Ashwind. "And I go home. Back to Shadowcrest. Back to the life I built." "Will you take Vernon's offer? The Marshal Commission? Maybe. On my terms. Part-time when I'm needed, not as a full-time job." She smiled. "Turns out you can't bury parts of yourself, but you can choose when and how to use them. That's freedom, Cole, real freedom." Vernon called from the fire that my watch was up. I stood to go, but Delaney caught my arm. "Thank you," she said, "for believing me, for following me here, for being the kind of lawman who cares about right more than rules." "I'm just learning," I said. "We all are. That's what makes us human." We broke camp at dawn and started the long ride back to Copper Springs. Cairo could ride, but not well, his shoulders stiffening up as the night wore off and pain settled in proper. Vernon led, with me bringing up the rear and Delaney in the middle, keeping watch on our prisoners. Vane rode in sullen silence. Corso and Beck just looked tired and defeated, like men who'd followed bad orders to their natural conclusion. Around midday, we stopped to rest the horses and eat cold rations. Vernon pulled Delaney aside while I watched the prisoners. I couldn't hear what they said, but I could see Vernon's face. He looked like a man confessing something heavy. Delaney listened, her expression unreadable. Then she put a hand on Vernon's shoulder and said something that made the old marshal's eyes water. When they came back, Vernon looked lighter somehow, like he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying too long. That evening, after we'd made camp, I asked Delaney what Vernon had said. "He told me he'd known who I was from the beginning," she said. "Recognized me about a month after I arrived in Copper Springs 8 years ago. He kept my secret all that time." "Why tell you now?" "Because he felt guilty. Said he should have warned me when he heard Marrow Vane was operating in the territory. Should have told me the danger so I could prepare or leave. But he didn't." No, because he was trying to protect me from becoming what I used to be. Thought if he told me I'd go hunting. And he'd promised himself he wouldn't be responsible for pulling me back into that life. I thought about that. About Vernon's choice between friendship and duty, between protecting someone's peace and preventing someone's death. What did you tell him? I asked. That he made the right choice. That those 8 years of peace were worth more than any warning. And that what happened with Vane, that was always going to happen, whether I knew it was coming or not. You don't blame him? For what? Respecting my choice to disappear? For giving me space to build a new life? She shook her head. Vernon Blackridge is a good man who made a hard choice. I won't punish him for trying to do right by me. That was when I understood something important about Delaney Frost. She'd spent 8 years learning to see complexity in things that used to be simple, to recognize that good people sometimes make questionable choices for decent reasons, to show mercy when judgment would be easier. We rode into town 2 days later, and it felt like the whole population turned out to watch. Word had spread somehow, probably from the stage driver who'd passed us on the road, that Marshal Blackridge was bringing in the rustlers who'd plagued the valley, that Mrs. Frost had tracked them across 2 territories, that there'd been a shootout at Samaran Pass. The truth was already becoming legend, details changing with each retelling. Dr. Maeve Hollowell was waiting outside her clinic, medical bag in hand. She took one look at Cairo's makeshift bandage and Delaney's pale face and started issuing orders. Cole, help Mr. Sawmill inside. Vernon, I need hot water and clean linens. Mrs. Frost, you sit down right now before you fall down. Delaney started to protest, but Maeve cut her off with a look that could freeze water in July. Don't even try it. I've been worried sick for 4 days, and you're going to let me tend that shoulder, or I'll sedate you and do it anyway. Delaney sat. Otis Calderwood pushed through the crowd, hat in hand, looking humbler than I'd ever seen him. Mrs. Frost, he said, I owe you an apology. Several, actually. You found my horses when the rest of us couldn't. You tracked professional criminals through impossible country, and you did it all while I was questioning your competence. Your horses are at the old mission in Dead Man's Pass, Delaney said tiredly, along with the Murphy brothers' stock and everyone else's. Vernon can organize a recovery party. I'll do it myself, Calderwood said. And Mrs. Frost, that offer I made, official tracker for the valley, it still stands if you're interested. I'll think about it. Maeve ushered Delaney inside the clinic, leaving the rest of us to deal with the crowd and the prisoners. Vernon put Vane, Corso, and Beck in the jail, which wasn't built for 3 men, but they'd make do until the territorial marshal arrived. The crowd slowly dispersed, everyone talking about what they'd heard, what they'd seen, what it all meant. I stayed outside the clinic, making sure nobody bothered Maeve while she worked. Through the window, I could see Cairo sitting on one examination table, while Maeve worked on Delaney at another. They were talking, all 3 of them, voices too low to hear. But I could see Cairo smile at something Delaney said, could see Maeve laugh. People who'd been through fire together, sharing the aftermath. An hour later, Maeve came out and found me on the steps. They'll both live, she said, sitting down beside me with a heavy sigh. Cairo's wound is clean, should heal fine with rest. Delaney's shoulder is infected, which is why she looks so awful. I've cleaned it out, started her on willow bark tea for the fever. Will she? She'll be fine. She's too stubborn to die from something as mundane as infection. Maeve looked at me. You care about her. I respect her. Same thing sometimes. Maeve was quiet for a moment. Thank you for bringing her back. If she died out there alone, she wasn't alone. She had Cairo, and then she had us. That's what saved her, I think. Not just the backup, but remembering she doesn't have to fight alone anymore. Maeve stood, brushing dust from her skirt. She can rest here tonight. Tomorrow she can go home. I'll make sure someone's watching her place, feeding her stock. Already arranged it. Calderwood sending 2 of his hands. Maeve smiled. See? When people actually respect her, they can't help enough. 3 days later, the territorial marshal arrived from Santa Fe. His name was Samuel Chen, and he was everything Vernon wasn't. Young, ambitious, dressed in a clean suit that had never seen trail dust. He looked at our jail, our evidence, our testimony, and his expression said he thought we were all incompetent backwater lawmen playing at justice. But when Vernon showed him Neo Graves's journal and the evidence Cairo had gathered, Chen's attitude changed fast. "This is extensive," he said, reading page after page. "Detailed, admissible, in any territorial court. 7 women," Cairo said quietly. He was still in town, recovering from his wound, staying in Maeve's spare room. "All indigenous, all murdered by a man who thought they didn't matter enough to investigate properly." Chen looked up from the journal, and for the first time I saw something like shame in his expression. "You're right," he said. "The territorial marshals didn't take these cases seriously, didn't follow up, didn't care." He closed the journal carefully. "That's going to change. I'll make sure of it." "Words are easy," Cairo said. "What about action? What do you want?" "I want the families notified properly. I want official death certificates issued so they can have closure. I want the territorial government to acknowledge these women existed and mattered. And I want a promise that future cases involving indigenous victims get the same attention as everyone else." Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I can't promise the system will change overnight, but I can promise I'll fight for it. And I can make sure these 7 families get everything you just asked for." "That's a start," Cairo said. Chen turned to Vernon. "And Morrow Vane? What's his status?" "Charged with murder, conspiracy to commit murder, theft, and about a dozen other counts. He'll hang or spend life in territorial prison. Either way, he's done." "What about his claim that Mrs. Frost's actions were motivated by revenge rather than law?" Vernon's jaw tightened. "Delaney Frost acted as a deputized civilian assisting in the recovery of stolen property and the apprehension of known criminals. Everything she did was legal and justified. Even tracking them for 4 days through the wilderness and ambushing them at Samaran Pass? Even that." Chen looked at me. "Deputy Arnett, you were there. Is that how you'd characterize her actions?" I thought about what I'd seen. About Delaney choosing not to shoot when she had clear shots. About her bluffing instead of killing. About her holding Vane at gunpoint and choosing to wait for backup rather than executing him. Mrs. Frost showed more restraint than most lawmen I've seen," I said. "She could have killed all 4 of them. She chose justice instead." "Interesting way to phrase it." "But accurate," Vernon added. "She had every legal and moral right to use lethal force. She didn't. That speaks to character, not revenge." Chen made notes in a leather-bound book. "I'll need formal statements from everyone involved, Mrs. Frost included." "She's recovering from a knife wound and infection," Vernon said. "You can interview her in a few days." "I'll wait." Chen stood. "In the meantime, I'll transport the prisoners to Santa Fe. We have better facilities for holding them until trial." As Chen left to arrange transport, Cairo caught my arm. "Thank you," he said, "for backing Delaney, for making sure the official record shows she acted with honor." I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do. A week after we returned to Copper Springs, I rode out to Shadow Crest Ranch. The sun was setting as I approached, painting the desert in those colors that make you understand why people stay in hard country. Gold and red and purple, all bleeding together at the horizon. Delaney was in the corral working with a young horse, a bay colt, maybe 2 years old, still learning to trust. She moved slow and patient, no force, no fear, just steady presence. Ashwin stood in an adjacent paddock watching. The silver dun looked content, well-fed, his coat gleaming in the evening light. I tied my horse at the fence and walked over. "Evening, Mrs. Frost." She turned, smiled. "Deputy, what brings you out here?" "Wanted to check on you, make sure you're healing up all right. Maeve's been by twice already. I'm fine." "Mind if I stay a minute anyway?" "Free country." We leaned against the corral fence, watching the young horse explore his space with careful steps. "What's his name?" I asked. Haven't decided yet, waiting to see what fits. That's different from Ashwind? Ashwind named himself. First time I tried to work with him, a wind kicked up, strong enough to bend the sage. He stood in it like it was nothing, just watching me. Wind like ash, soft but everywhere, so Ashwind fit. The young horse came over to investigate us. Delaney let him sniff her hand, then stroked his neck gentle. Cairo left this morning, I said after a while. Heading back to Navajo territory. Said he'd be back through in a few months after he's visited all 7 families. That's good. They deserve to hear it from him. He left something for you. I pulled a beaded leather pouch from my coat. Said his sister would have wanted you to have it. Delaney took it carefully, opened it. Inside was a small turquoise pendant on a leather cord. It's beautiful, she whispered. He said you gave him back something he thought was lost. This is to remember that sometimes what's lost can be found again. Delaney put the pendant on, and it rested against her collarbone like it had always belonged there. Vernon's retiring, I said. Official announcement next week. Town council's asking him to recommend a replacement. He'll recommend you. How do you know? Because you're what comes next, young enough to learn, old enough to have judgment. And you care about right more than rules. That's rare. I don't know if I'm ready. Nobody ever is, but you'll grow into it. She smiled. Besides, you'll have help. Vernon's not going anywhere, just stepping back. And I'll be around if you need tracking advice. You taking Calderwood's offer then? Modified version, part-time consultant, cases that need my specific skills. But Shadowcrest comes first. And the Marshal Commission? The one the territorial government offered? Delaney was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the ridge behind her ranch. I accepted it, she said finally, in special appointment. Only active when needed, no regular circuit. I can work from here, take cases that matter, and still run my ranch. Best of both worlds? Balance, she corrected. That's what I learned out there in Devil's Playground. You don't have to choose between who you were and who you are. You just have to find the balance. The young horse wandered back to his hay, losing interest in us. The light was fading fast now, the way it does in the desert. 1 minute gold, the next minute blue. There's something else, I said. Something Vernon wanted me to ask you. What's that? He wants to know if you'd teach. At the Territorial Law Enforcement Academy in Santa Fe, guest instructor a couple weeks a year, teaching tracking, reading sign. The skills you have that most lawmen don't. Delaney looked at me, surprised. Vernon suggested that? Said if the next generation is going to be better than the last, they need to learn from the best. And you're the best he's ever seen. She thought about it. That would mean leaving the ranch, traveling. Twice a year, 2 weeks each time. You could make it work. I could, she said slowly, and it would mean those skills don't die with me. Mean other people learn to track not just criminals, but truth. Is that a yes? That's a, I'll think about it, she smiled, but probably yes. We stood in comfortable silence as the stars started coming out. The desert cooled fast once the sun was down, and I pulled my coat tighter. I should get back, I said. Early day tomorrow. Cole, Delaney said as I turned to go, thank you for everything, for believing in me when others didn't, for riding to Samaran Pass, for making sure the official record was fair. I just did what was right. Exactly. And that's rarer than you think. She paused. Vernon's right to recommend you. You'll make a good marshal. I rode back toward town as full darkness fell, and behind me the lights of Shadowcrest Ranch glowed warm against the night. That was spring of 1886. I'm telling you this story in the spring of 1896, sitting in my office with a badge on my chest that says Marshal instead of Deputy. The young deputy who asked about Delaney's badge is still here, sitting quiet, listening like his life depends on every word. Maybe it does. Maybe that's how you learn what kind of lawman to be, by listening to the stories of the ones who came before. What happened to everyone? He asks when I finish. After Samaran Pass? I lean back in my chair, looking at the silver badge with turquoise inlay on my wall. Morrow Vane hanged in Santa Fe 6 months after his trial. Corso Vale got 10 years for being an accessory. Beckholler turned witness and got 5. He's out now, working honest on a ranch near Tucson. And Cairo? Cairo Sawmill became a legend in his own right. Tribal investigator who never stops, never gives up. He visits Copper Springs twice a year, stops by Shadowcrest to check on Delaney, their friends, the kind forged in fire. Vernon Blackridge? Retired, just like he said. Lives quietly in town, plays chess with Doctor. Hollowell advises me when I need it, which is often. I smile. He and Delaney have dinner once a month, talk about old cases, old mistakes, old wisdom. The young deputy leans forward. And Mrs. Frost? Is she still at Shadowcrest? She is. Still tracking. When the territory needs her, but mostly she raises horses and trains them gentle, teaches at the academy in Santa Fe twice a year, consults on cases that need her specific eye. I pause. And she's happy, really happy, in a way she wasn't before. Because she caught Vane? No. Because she learned she could use her skills without becoming what she feared. Because she found balance between the widow and the hunter, between building and tracking, between the shadow and the light. The young deputy looks at the badge on the wall. Can I ask you something, Marshal? Go ahead. The legend says she tracked Morrow Vane across 3 territories and brought him in alone, that she outfought 4 armed men at Samaran Pass, that she's the greatest tracker who ever lived. That's not a question. Is it true? I think about how to answer that, about the difference between legend and truth, and how sometimes both can be real at the same time. The legend's got some facts right, I say finally. Delaney Frost did track Morrow Vane across hard country, did help bring down a killer who thought he was untouchable, did prove that one person with skill and determination can make a difference. But here's what the legend gets wrong. She wasn't alone. She had Cairo. She had Vernon. She had me, stumbling along behind, trying to learn. And she didn't do it because she was fearless. She did it scared. Scared of becoming what she used to be. Scared of failing the people who counted on her. Scared of losing herself in the hunt. I stand and walk to the window looking out at Copper Springs. Still the same dusty street, same false front buildings, same hard country surrounding it all. The real legend, I continue, isn't about Shadowstep returning. It's about Delaney Frost learning that you don't have to bury parts of yourself to be whole, that the woman who hunts and the woman who builds can be the same person, that mercy and strength aren't opposites. And that, I turn back to face him, is a harder lesson than any amount of tracking skill. But it's the one that matters most. The young deputy nods, thinking about it. You want to meet her? I ask. Mrs. Frost? His eyes go wide. I can do that? Sure. Ride out to Shadowcrest sometime. Bring respect and maybe a horse that needs gentling. She's partial to the broken ones. I smile. Says they remind her of herself. After the deputy leaves, I sit alone in my office as evening falls and think about all the years between then and now. Vernon taught me about patience. Cairo taught me about persistence. But Delaney Frost taught me the most important lesson of all, that justice isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing right when wrong would be easier, about showing mercy when vengeance feels justified, about building something that lasts even when destruction is all around you, and about integrating all the parts of yourself, shadow and light, strength and gentleness, what you were and what you've become, into something whole and honest and true. That's the legend they don't tell, but it's the one worth remembering. Delaney Frost stood on the porch of her cabin at Shadowcrest Ranch, watching the sun set behind Coyote Ridge. 15 years since that morning she'd found the broken lock. 15 years since Morrow Vane had forced her hand and made her choose between hiding and becoming. The ranch had grown, more acres now, more horses, a proper barn instead of just a stable, a second cabin for the hired hand who helped with the heavy work. But the core was the same, the quiet, the purpose, the peace she'd fought so hard to build and protect. Ashwind grazed in the near pasture, 23 years old now, retired from training work but still strong, still beautiful. He'd sired a dozen foals over the years, each one carrying his bloodline forward. Building something that lasts, she thought, just like I promised. A rider appeared on the horizon coming from town. As they got closer, Delaney recognized Cole Arnett, Marshal Arnett now, for going on 15 years, doing Vernon proud. He tied his horse and walked up to the porch, hat in hand. "Evening, Delaney." "Marshal," she smiled. They'd long since dropped the formalities in private. "What brings you out?" "Got a case. Missing girl, 9 years old, wandered away from a picnic 3 days ago. Search parties found nothing. Parents are desperate." Delaney felt the familiar pull. The call to use skills that never really faded, never really went away. "Where?" "North of town. Pine country. Rough terrain." "I'll need an hour to prepare. Can you wait?" "I can wait." She went inside and gathered her tracking tools. The brass spyglass, the magnifying lenses, the beaded pouch her grandfather had given her all those years ago, the Colt revolver cleaned and maintained even in times of peace, some tools you never stopped needing, some skills you never stopped using. But now she chose when and how. That was the difference. That was the freedom. An hour later, they rode north together. Marshal and Tracker, working as they had for 15 years, finding the lost and bringing them home. As they rode, Delaney thought about Rowan, about the promise she'd made and the ways she'd kept it, not by burying who she was, but by integrating it into who she'd become, the widow and the hunter, the builder and the tracker, the shadow and the light. All of it one person, all of it whole. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust and the promise of rain. Somewhere ahead, a child waited to be found, and Delaney Frost rode toward that need with skills honed over decades and wisdom earned through blood and choice. Behind her, Shadow Crest Ranch stood solid against the ridge, proof that building mattered, that creation endured, that promises could be kept in ways you never expected. And ahead of her, the trail waited to be read. Some things never changed. The desert still held secrets. People still got lost. And some of us still knew how to find them, not because we had to, but because we chose to. And in the choosing, we found ourselves. That's the real legend. That's the truth worth telling. That's how Shadowstep rests, not in silence, not in hiding, but in balance. Working when needed, building when able, choosing always to serve rather than dominate. The sun set behind them as they rode, painting the world in shades of gold and red. And somewhere in that light, a lost child waited to be found. So Delaney Frost rode on as she always had, as she always would, finding the lost, restoring what was broken, building something that lasts, the end.